Everybody, welcome to Monday, April 8th, 2019, 7 p.m. meeting of the Groton Select Board up in the second floor Groton Town Hall meeting room. Today, after I review this agenda, we'll have announcements followed by a public comment period. And in the town manager report, we have our regular agenda schedule. Consider taking positions on Article 4, which is the budget, the citizens petition Article 26, Article 28, the snow and ice deficit, Article 31, cable enterprise of the springtime meeting warrant, and then finalize the warrant for printing and posting. We'll also discuss position on Article 10, which is to position the legislature to establish a ticket tax in Groton. We'll also discuss a position on Article 14, which is the Prescott building maintenance funding. At 7:15, we have a publicized event with the Friends of Prescott and a request for establishment of the Prescott Development Committee. Under other business, we will attempt to finalize the annual review of the town manager, and then we will give an update on the investigation report. We have our ongoing issues, followed by select board liaison reports. Under minutes, we have the regular scheduled meeting minutes of March 25th, 2019, and the regularly scheduled meeting minutes of April 1st, 2019. After which it is our plan to go into executive session to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, or to conduct collective bargaining sessions or contract negotiations with non-union personnel. Purpose is the town manager's contract. We will not be returning to regular session after that. And thank you very much. So on to announcements. I know that Becky has an announcement, and John has an announcement, and the town manager has an announcement. So Becky.
Yes, I just wanted to note the recent passing of Helen McCarthy Sawyer. She was a well-known and long-lived woman. She was 109 when she passed away, I believe on March 31st. She had taught English and reading at the Prescott School when it was a junior-senior high school for 21 years. She served in many different town organizations. She was president of the Historical Society. She was a trustee of the library for 17 years. And she wrote 3 books that are, I think, still available through the History Center. One book about Lydia Longley, the first American nun. And that's, for those who don't know, Longley Road is named for the Longley family, whose children were kidnapped by Native Americans. Lydia was one of them. She also wrote 2 books called People and Places in Groton, about Groton's history and houses. She lived on Hollis Street. I remember her mostly as a beautiful, older, white-haired woman who did a lot of walking in the center of town and had very erect, beautiful posture. She was also very friendly to people who spoke to her. Thank you.
A lot of history there. Thank you. John? You have something, John?
I have 2 announcements. One, yesterday, I had the privilege of representing the town at an Eagle Scout Court of Honor, at which Aiden Prince from Troop 1 in West Groton became an Eagle Scout. That's pretty significant. The statistics are out of every 100 people who are Boy Scouts, 5% or less make it to Eagle Scout. So he got a proclamation, which I read yesterday was his day in Groton. The other item I have here, and I saw it just today on, once again, the Groton Grange number 7 is holding its annual town-wide litter cleanup on Saturday, April 27th from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. and Sunday, April 28th from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Their booth will be in front of the Prescott School on Main Street. Stop by the booth to pick up gloves and trash bags and join them in the town-wide litter cleanup. That's all I got.
Thank you. Josh, you said you had something.
I do, actually. This afternoon, our town clerk, Mike Bouchard's wife, Carol Bouchard, passed away. And Carol was a wonderful woman, full of spirit, who had a hard, long fight with a horrible disease called cancer, which is just a terrible thing. And our condolences go out to Mike for the loss of his wife. Carol was an employee of my company for many, many years, and she was a wonderful person, full of spirit, kindness, wisdom, creativity, so she will be sorely missed. So if you see Mike in the near future, there will be funeral arrangements to be announced. But again, condolences go out to Mike and his entire family.
Mark?
That's a tough,
Yeah.
tough
Should let you go
announcement to
first.
follow. Tomorrow, the municipal committee out of the State House, the Joint Committee on Municipal Government, will be holding a hearing on our charter at the State House. I'll be attending, representing the town at the hearing.
So does that mean that tomorrow they might actually vote on our charter?
If they'll probably, hopefully, they'll
This is the
vote
committee.
positive out of committee, which means
Okay.
it'll go to the floor for
I
a
don't know
vote.
if it has to
Okay.
go to another committee or.
I think it has to go for a third reading.
Third
all
reading,
that
okay.
business.
We're almost there.
We're
We'll get
getting
there.
closer.
We're getting closer.
Yeah.
Okay, any other announcements from the public? Yes, Marlena?
Hi, I just wanted to check in with you guys because we have our meeting on Wednesday, school committee. Between the last week, have you guys received any emails in regards to community input, feedback in regards to the upcoming decision in regards to outsourcing either management or the complete food service department that I can relay back to my board?
I'm only aware of one email, but I don't know if it was this week or last week that we received, the board received, but I think it was last week because I saw your response.
I have not received anything new.
I have had some correspondence and conversations, but I'm gonna keep them private at the moment.
Nothing.
Okay, thanks, Marlena. Anybody else? Okay, all right, Mr. Town Manager.
Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me, wait, let me make public comment period, I apologize, just in case, I know that kinda got blurred there. All right, sorry, Mark, thanks.
Mr. Chairman, I've given you a copy of the latest draft of the warrant. We go to print tomorrow, so I'm gonna be asking the selectmen tonight to approve the warrant for posting and send it to the printer first thing tomorrow morning. There are a few articles that the board still needs to take positions on, and you requested additional information. So I would ask the board to consider taking positions on at least 4 of the articles. Article 4, the town budget. The Finance Committee has voted unanimously to approve the budget contained in the warrant. The total budget is $39,721,234. It is $197,995 under the levy limit. I'd ask the board to consider taking a position.
Members, any questions? No questions. Would anybody like to start giving their position on this? I'll start. Pieces in favor.
As am I.
I'm opposed.
I'm holding off till town meeting.
I'm in favor.
So 3, 1, 1.
That's how I heard it as well, yes.
Okay.
All right,
The next article for the board is Article 26, Citizens Petition. The board had asked for an update on the drainage. You have a very detailed response from our land use director that he's provided for you. I would say, to summarize it, we're in good shape, that they're probably gonna approve the plan at their next meeting on April 16th, based on all the engineering comments. If there's anything that's going to hold this up, it'll be more with regards to the state chapter Article 97 process, because one of the criteria is to have a equal amount of land put into conservation that you are taking out, even with an easement, even though it's staying conservation land. And right now, they're having a hard time determining what that is, but we have time to do that before town meeting. But I think the bottom line is they have a decent plan to fix the drainage problem out there. And Representative Harrington was at the hearing, and her office is prepared to shepherd it through the legislature when it comes forward. So I'd ask whether or not the board wants to take a position on that article.
Mark, do you have a feel for roughly how much area you're talking about that they're looking for?
1 acre.
Okay,
It's 1 acre, Allison.
thank you.
Before we take position on there, one of the things I'm concerned with is that the recommendations by the town's consulting engineer says that there should be some degree of mitigation for the flooding at 10 Olivia Way, and that it should make the situation somewhat better down there. I'm not looking for a somewhat better solution. I mean, a somewhat better solution, and I'm not making light of it, a somewhat better solution is far from a solution. You have a subdivision that's developed in the town, and people who are coming and moving into town, and they pay taxes to our community. And there's an expectation on behalf of those folks that the planning board has vetted things out in conjunction with the Conservation Commission, and while they did do that, it certainly didn't work. So I'm looking for a solution that is going to work.
Well, they did have a second, based on your input at the meeting that we had on the public hearing, they did bring in a second consulting engineer to review the plans. So there were two consulting engineers looking at it, Nitch and
Yeah, I see.
CEI. Yeah, Tom is part of the Earth Removal Stormwater Committee, if you have any specific questions on the status. You were at the hearing, right, Tom? I think it might be helpful to hear from Tom, Josh.
Tom, thank you.
I was at the hearing. So the plan they came up with, in theory and on paper, is gonna work. Is it gonna be complete? We really don't know. I think part of it addresses 10 Olivia Way, which is the person that has the large flooding in the basement. They're gonna put some curtains behind that house to try to divert the water away. But once the water's gone down below, the theory is that it should alleviate the water problems there. Until we see it on the ground, it's really hard to tell. But the amount of volume that the catchment area is gonna hold and the release, that it's gonna release slowly onto the conservation property, which was what the goal is gonna take care of that extra water that's, by the calculations, of pooling in the bottom of that subdivision.
And is the elevation of the area they're talking about doing the discharge to substantially below the high water mark of the base of the foundation of the homes? Do you follow that?
I do, and they are extremely close, if not they're extremely close. So this is actually a wet detention basin they're making. It's probably gonna be wet most of the time. For some reason or another, and nobody knows why, that water table went from 8 feet to 4 feet in that whole area. It's an old reclaimed gravel pit, and nobody knows why from the initial tests that were witnessed by the Board of Health, why it went from 8 feet to 4 feet. There's no way to explain it without digging in and spending a lot of money. And we didn't contract anybody to do that. We're trying to help facilitate correcting the situation.
So has anybody discussed a solution that involves putting a pump chamber into the cul-de-sac, which is the low area, and do a force main release into the Pepperell sewer system?
No,
Why?
because then we'll have to pay for discharge into water. You can't put groundwater in sewer systems. That's a DEP no-no. So they won't be able to do that anyways. But the elevation of the lower drainage areas at the bottom of that cul-de-sac, it's like 1 or 2 foot pitch going out of that whole subdivision going out back. So it's gonna flow out of there now. Right now, it just can't go out because it's like sitting in a bowl. There's no outlet. With the creation of this outlet, it's gonna make things a lot better. It's the only question, what you said was what it's gonna do to 10 Olivia. We're not sure because there's a drainage system in Pepperell behind that house. Hopefully the curb is gonna divert the water away from it and into the other infiltration basins.
Was the developer willing to put up a bond for this solution?
The
No,
planning board's already holding a pretty
Yeah, but the
substantial
bond
bond.
that they're holding is not the bond that covers this. It's a different bond, I thought. The planning board's holding $200,000 or something?
Yeah,
It is, but the planning board called planning for modification, and when they do that, they can redistribute that, I believe. So there is
I believe
there
that's
was a
correct.
mechanism they did somehow to make sure they had some leverage.
As long as there's some leverage with the bond, I mean, I think then if it doesn't work, then you still have recourse.
Yep.
Okay.
John?
As I said last week, the contractor cannot be let off the hook until there is a working solution, not a reduction in what's happening, an elimination of what's happening. And since this seems to be significant, I think it behooves the planning board, when they reopen, to look real hard at what they've got in there for a contingency, the bond that's being held. And if there's any doubt in anybody's mind that this is gonna solve the problem, that should be increased significantly to ensure that enough funds are available if the whole problem gets turned over to the town.
So I think what I'm hearing here is that, so far, I apologize, Becky, is that the board's in favor of doing something, but we want to make sure that it's done right and done once and done, so.
Well, and that there's
And
sufficient
that there's
resources.
Follow up with the planning
leverage to follow up. Becky?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I'm also reading the parts about the Conservation Commission being cautious and everyone being a little bit concerned, and that they haven't made any progress on finding the alternative land to put into conservation. So I'm not ready to take a position on this. I mean, I obviously support solving the problem, but I don't want to let any part of the solution be ignored or let slide.
Well, I will tell you, I understand your point, but if they don't have land to swap, no matter what the town meeting votes, no matter what the plans are approved, the legislature will not approve the Article 97 proposal. So that is a requirement, it's not a necessity, it has to happen.
Allison?
You know, so to me, obviously, I think we're all in favor of a solution here. My concern, Martin, this is a question to you, I guess, my concern with saying we support this now would be that if it changes between now and town meeting, now we've got a really kind of muddy situation going on, so I
No
think
pun intended.
yeah, no pun intended.
Do you wanna defer your recommendation to
That's
the
what I
night of
think
town
that
meeting?
makes more sense,
Right.
to hold everybody
That's
until
fine.
town
I'm
meeting
a town
and then.
meeting as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
everybody okay
Town
with that?
meeting.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
That's fair. Article 28 is the snow and ice deficit. The deficit right now is $65,000, and the Board of Assessors did in fact vote and approve a transfer from overlay surplus at their meeting Friday afternoon to cover that deficit. I'd ask the board to take a position on that article.
Any questions from board members?
So this is supporting their recommendation or their willingness to use that money this way?
Correct.
or-
They released it specifically to close off the deficit, so we'll have zero deficit, and that's why we're $197,000 under the levy limit next year. As of now.
Understood, but if we're, so in reading Article 28.
Yep.
If we support that, it's specifically, you know, it's one of those articles that references available funds and accounts. and-
Yep,
It'll
the
be
exact motion, that's a great question, Allison. The exact motion will say to see if the town will vote to transfer from overlay surplus the sum of $65,000 for this purpose.
So, can I ask a
Yeah,
question?
Becky?
If we're that far under the levy limit, why are we doing it this different way than,
We've done it in the past to keep the deficit at a certain level. 2 years ago, we transferred $50,000 out of overlay surplus to keep the deficit at 150. This year, to deal with the budget for next year, we wanted to make sure that we had available funds, so we want to get rid of the deficit so that we go into next year with a more healthy reserve. Because we know next year is going to be a very difficult year.
okay?
So is this a change, Mark, from how we've handled this in years?
No, this
past?
is an annual article. We've done it in the past. We try to keep the deficit at a certain level. This year, we're just gonna wipe it out. But we're not spending that money. You know, there was 150,000. Instead of being 197,000 under the levy limit, we'd be $47,000 under the levy limit. This year, we're not gonna carry a deficit into next year, but we're not spending that money on operating expenses, so it's available to spend next fiscal year, whether it be on snow and ice deficit or operating costs.
So is this a paradigm in kind of how we budget? I know we've had discussions of both pieces,
Yep.
and I'm having trouble keeping straight kind of which is whom.
This year, I just wanted to, but my recommendation was to get rid of the deficit, and maybe if we decide to go that route in future years, we've started the process, but nothing will prohibit us from raising it next year because we are that amount of money under the levy limit. I'm sorry if it's confusing.
I support.
Anybody else want to take a position on
I
this?
support.
I also support this. Josh?
just this whole issue is just so cloudy. It's just so artificial that we're under the levy limit because we're bait and switch, I'll call it.
It's
And
not a
that-
bait,
listen,
no, Josh,
No,
Let me finish
No, no.
speaking, please, okay? This is not you bait and switching, Mark. This is a manipulation of money, not using the word manipulation in a negative connotation, but moving money around in order to, in my opinion, artificially keep us below the levy limit. And we know that next year, we're staring tough financial ground that could be upwards of $750,000 deficit, which we've talked about. When you look at the assessment being reduced by the Groton Dunstable Regional School District of over $300,000 to us, and then you couple that with $65,000 reduction for snow and ice, there's a lot of mitigating reasons why we're $200,000 under the levy limit, and that's great. Don't get me wrong. But it doesn't set us up and it doesn't bode well going into next year doing things like this. So while you may have the money that could be returned to free cash if it wasn't used from the
Nope.
overlay deficit.
no, it would stay in overlay if we didn't spend it.
So what happens next year then for overlay if there's more abatements? If there's no money in there, do we need to?
This is from overlay surplus. We're carrying a $150,000 line item in the FY '20 budget for FY '20 overlay. This is money that was raised in previous years that's not needed. So I want you, let me put it this way,
So it
Josh.
doesn't go back to free cash?
No, let me
Where
put
would
it.
it go?
It would just stay in the overlay surplus. We just wouldn't spend it. We just sit in overlay surplus.
Yeah, because it can't be returned to free
Which is
cash.
an
It has to
earning
be
interest,
transferred.
probably.
So let me put it this way for you. Every year you have been a proponent in the fall of transferring money out of free cash to offset the tax rate.
Yes, I have.
Okay, I want you to look at this particular article in that light, that we're using $65,000 in overlay surplus to lower taxes next year, because instead of raising that on the recap sheet and increasing taxes to raise the 65, we're eliminating it and saving 3 cents, 4 cents on the tax rate?
Yeah, it's about 6.5
So
cents,
all you do-
$100,000.
Yeah.
All you're doing is taking unused money from the overlay deficit. It's as simple as that to offset the tax rate.
That's what I'm doing.
I support.
Thank you.
Allison, that leaves you.
I'll support.
So that's 5 supports.
I still feel the same though about
Understood your point.
the rest of the budget situation that I
Understand your
pointed
point.
out.
As do I.
The final article that the board needed to take action on was the board wanted to know how much money the cable committee is looking to transfer out of their E&D to offset their budget this year, and the amount is $10,000. Does the board want to take a position on that? It's coming out of their E&D.
Yeah, I
I support.
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 That's 5 supports.
Excellent. Barry, you had asked that the board's position on Article 10, the ticket tax, be further discussed tonight. It is on the agenda for you to discuss.
Yeah, we're past our 7:15. Why don't we defer to the Prescott team for their 7:15, and then we'll return to item number 3.
All right, if you go to page 68 in your packet, there is a letter from the, there's a letter that, under announcements, I was supposed to read a letter
That's right.
into the record, so if I can do that
Yeah,
right now,
that's-
because this
that's
has to do
appropriate.
with, this has
Yeah.
to do with, the Prescott piece.
I'm happy to read it if,
I have it right here. So to the, dated April 4, 2019, to the Groton Select Board. At the 4/1/2019 Select Board meeting, Mary Jennings stated during discussion that the Friends of Prescott were the only respondent to the Prescott RFP. That statement prompted me to look at the RFP that was issued for Prescott. After reading the RFP parameters, it's not surprising that only the Friends of Prescott responded. The RFP seems to indicate that the chosen operator of Prescott, now the Friends of Prescott, was to consider and assume all the risk of the building conditions in their response and plan to operate. Please clarify the expectations for the chosen operator of the Prescott per the RFP. I am wondering why the Friends of Prescott was allowed to occupy the Prescott before the RFP and before any lease agreement and before the code issues were resolved. I'm wondering why the Friends of Prescott lease was signed before a business plan was presented. I am wondering why the business plan was approved by the SB as it appears to breach the lease agreement regarding required rental payments. I am wondering if the Friends of Prescott are meeting the other requirements of the RFP and the lease, where in the lease or RFP are taxpayer funds promised or guaranteed. I am wondering why this group is getting such special considerations unlikely available to others. I am wondering why the Select Board deem it appropriate to subsidize this group with taxpayer money? What is the critical necessity of this group to the town? The often cited, quote, townwide survey regarding the Prescott building received 191 responses. 72% of the respondents, a whole 124 individuals, were in favor of the town retaining the building. 124 individuals are not the town, as some keep repeating. And even the number of users of the Friends of Prescott programming does not come close to the majority of the town's population. Interestingly, this same survey asked if the town should subsidize the retention of the building. So call it what you want, taxpayer money support this, quote, nice-to-have private entity project is a subsidy. Before any more taxpayer money is invested or spent other than immediate necessary safety issues to be presented at the Springtown meeting, the Select Board needs to review all that has transpired and consider that the Friends of Prescott, without considerable ongoing taxpayer subsidy, is likely a non-viable operation financially. Any entity unable to pay rent for 2 years has to be considered financially non-viable. Janet Landry Shea, Pequawket Path. I request that this letter be read at the next Select Board meeting and entered into the minutes. That said, Mr. Chairman, you have a, I'm sorry, go ahead.
We have another letter that came into the Board of Selectmen dated April 2nd from the Pages for Peace Foundation. I'm writing to you on behalf of the Big Book, Pages for Peace Foundation Board of Directors. Members of our board, including myself, attended the March 25th, 2019 Select Board meeting and several others over the past year and a half, specifically meetings that included the Friends of Prescott Committee on your agenda. Following the March 25th meeting, we wish to express our sincere hope that while recognizing the new challenges and updated information to this historic building, the Groton Select Board upholds and supports its commitment to the 3-year lease with Friends of Prescott. The Pages for Peace Foundation has a vested interest in seeing the mission of the Friends of Prescott succeed. We've been working closely with the Friends of Prescott and are dependent upon them to provide the rental space on Prescott's first floor so that we will be able to display the Big Book, Pages for Peace, and provide Groton residents in many other communities in eastern Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire with a museum-quality exhibit. We are preparing to sign a lease for a minimum of 1 year and have the funding to do so. Currently, we are renting space, storage space in the Prescott basement. As another all-volunteer nonprofit organization in Groton, we are in awe of all the Friends of Prescott Committee, that all the Friends of the Prescott Committee has accomplished in such a relatively short time. The FOP leadership team has shown tremendous professionalism, building a far-reaching group of volunteers, creating an excellent website and catalogs with a vast array of classes and courses, and maintaining fluid communications at well-attended board meetings, many of which we visited to stay informed. Over the past year and a half, we have watched Friends of Prescott respond to the many twists and turns of the building code requirements, usage codes, compliance requirements, and recommendations, as well as building repairs, both expected and unexpected. In working to fulfill their mission to keep the historic town center building open and viable for the public's use, Friends of Prescott have maintained transparency, good communication, strong determination, and the necessary flexibility to secure this important community center. Very few volunteer organizations would have the ability and the stamina to face the endless hurdles while providing so much good. We urge the Select Board to work closely with Friends of Prescott, do everything possible to support their effort, and move this process forward. Many of us have been in town long enough to know the twists and turns that this cherished building has already taken in the past 20 years, including the town meeting where the sale of the building has been twice voted down by our community. We are aware of the ongoing financial pressures that come from maintaining a building of this age, but we all feel that short-term costs dim in comparison to the long-range gains of preserving preserving Groton's past and embracing our future. We're hopeful that with the Prescott Development Committee and other solution-oriented efforts, Groton town boards and committees will pull together to resolve building challenges and preserve Groton's historic town treasure, as many other communities in Massachusetts have done in their own towns. Prescott Building and its friends deserve all our help and support. With sincere thanks for all your time and attention to this important project. Pages for Peace Foundation Board of Directors, Susan Colt Wilcox, Annie Pulaski, Stacy Chilcote, Eileen Hill, Drew Gentile, Michael Sachichi.
Sucheki.
Yes, it is Sucheki, yes. Okay, so, thank you for reading those in, appreciate that.
So, Mr. Chairman, up on the screen is a letter from the Friends asking for the board to create the Prescott Development Committee. And I'm sure, I think I saw Mary here. Mary, if you want to come up to the table.
Thought you needed an escort. Thank you for inviting us. For the opportunity to give you a little perspective that's a little different than perhaps the perspective you have now. My name is Bill Cater. I'm a relative newcomer, especially when I look around this room, to Groton. Been in town just under 3 years. Live up on Chicopee Road at 346, and love the town. I've already moved from here from Harvard, and went through a building process here in town, which was graciously embraced to put on an in-law apartment. One of the reasons we moved here was because of the town's attitude towards that kind of building and support of it. I've also been a relative newcomer on the Friends of Prescott board, I think just over a year. And while I intend to be very brief with this whole thing, I do think a little perspective on why I ended up in that position would help you understand what I'm trying to get across to you. I looked at this board, and I wasn't at the Friends of Prescott, and I wasn't interested in a private organization. I was interested in a nonprofit, of course, to give my time to, but I wanted something that had public appeal, that was doing something for the community. And while this, the organization, the status of the company is private, it's not a publicly supported, owned, or anything else organization. Its mission, its behavior, and its intentions were solidly public. I was very much impressed. I think preserving the building is wonderful. I have less of an investment in that than some folks that have been in Groton for as long as they have, and I understand both sides of that position. But in addition to saving the building, I thought that this is kind of an elegant solution in that we could save this wonderful building while providing a community center and while providing a self-sustaining business element within the building. And that's what encouraged me to get involved. I thought that was a worthy fight so that we could finally come up with something for the town. Any town, frankly, would be a great fight in. Come up with something for the town that would provide public service, that would provide a public asset worth being proud of, and which might come in handy at some time if the town's personal needs need expanded in any way from town hall or any place else. So have that without putting a burden on the taxpayers. Two ways of doing that. Number one, because of the building status, the CPC availability of certain funds. There's also some state grants that might be available to it. But furthermore, and most importantly, we feel that we can put enough rental space used in that building to defray all of the costs. That said, we've had some troubles. There's been some, as somebody mentioned, that letter mentioned, for example, there have been some stumbles along the way. We've had some miscommunications with the building department. We've had some setbacks. We sometimes feel like we're taking a couple steps forward and then a couple back. We're a very stubborn group, and we work very hard to try to get this thing done for all the purposes, the public purposes I've just come up with. And that's what I think we need help with, and that's what I'm here to ask for tonight. In the original discussion about this, a development committee was discussed, and somewhere along the way, believe me, I have no input on how, where, or what twist took place at that time, but it never got done. And I think at this point in the proceedings, It would be very helpful for both the town and for the Friends of Prescott, and for the health of the project, and the taxpayers, to have a development committee that represented all of those voices. We would increase the communication between the Friends and not only the select board, but the entire town. We would have representation, obviously, with a number of boards. It could be a person from the select board, it could be a person from FinCom, it could be, in addition to the Friends, it could be somebody from the building department, it could be somebody that has some expertise with real estate. We work very hard, and we have some very bright and diligent folks on the board, but we could use the help. Some of the things that this committee would do would help to align the vision, make sure that everybody's singing off the same page, and I think that's been a bit of a problem. It's not a right or wrong, it's well, let's find out what the reality of the situation is and move towards it as a goal. And if that reality comes up, if this committee is in place, and that reality says that what we've got in mind, or what we've had, what we envisioned in the Friends of Prescott is not a viable path, then so be it, and off to another path we go. But it's important for us to get that perspective in the middle. It would increase the communication, it would help ensure that we're sharing a vision, and it would help with budgetary oversight, it would help with other brains working on the problem, it would help with other voices coming in. We're a very small group right now, although our volunteer base is wonderful, and they always come to the call when we need them for painting or repairs or anything else. The folks that actually on a day-to-day get it done is a very small group of people. It's a little bit tired group of people, and we could use the infusion of new ideas, new perspectives, new ways of getting things done, and we think if the select board would support such a committee, that committee would provide those things.
Can I ask a question?
Can I ask a question first?
You're the chair.
I'm a little confused as to how to reconcile the thought that there's no taxpayer money involved when we are going to discuss later putting an article on the warrant to fund.
Yep.
And then in this very letter, we have an addition request of alarm system, plus the idea that CPC isn't non-taxpayer money. It is taxpayer. Yes, it's matched. There's a match to it, but that's still taxpayer funding. I think we should be clear that we all know there's taxpayer money involved, whether it goes through CPC.
Yes.
True, if there's grants, 100% agree with you.
Absolutely.
Although somebody's got to pay those somewhere, but understand.
So what I tried to be clear about was talked about what the vision was, to get this to a place where it is self-sustaining through rental income. The community, the community center pays for itself, but that's about it. I mean, it's not going to carry the rest of the load for that building in anybody's imagination. It wouldn't be right to charge the kind of prices you would need, and obviously we wouldn't get the kind of crowds that we're attracting. So when I talk about this building becoming an asset that's self-sustainable, it's not now. It's not now. We have 4 tenants in the building. We're hoping to get a 5th with the Book of Peace, and I think it has some real opportunities. We're working with basically 1 floor that's suitable for rental right now, and it's a popular spot. We have some demand. We have some other demands. We have to iron out the whole thing with what kinds of folks can come in and what kind of uses can be done. But that is aside. That's one of the communication efforts that we're going to have to come up with, get that straight and get it done. Nobody's interested in operating anything that's outside of any of the laws, building laws, whatever, zoning. All this has to be done. And that's one of the things that I think this committee can help with. But what I talk about, and what we talk about every meeting, is how we can get this building to a truly self-sustaining situation while it still remains the property of the town, has an aspect to it that operates as a community center for the benefit of the town, and it does all of this without a taxpayer burden at that point in time. Now, the renovations, and I read all of the early documents, which gives me some of the facts, but not some of the color of what was going on in all of that time. But the renovation is a big piece, and I think that would be difficult to do, even with robust rental income. That would be difficult to do without CPC funds. But beyond that initial stage there, I think that a self-sustaining building is actually doable in the spot. And I think it would be well received by local businesses while it continues to provide community services.
So Groton sort of lives on a 20-year building cycle. When I hear you speak about, get it started now, to me that means 20 years from now that there would be funds in place to refurbish the building once again, and not have to spend $10 million to replace a building at a community center. So these are the things that I hear, as a select board member charged with till, May 20th with responsibility of overseeing the town's future.
Of course.
And I want you to realize those words have power, and stating such as the indication may forbid future, things happening if this is successful. So I would be careful how we speak and proceed from here. I apologize.
No,
I
don't,
cut you off.
sorry. My question is, you spoke very eloquently about the committee. Has the Friends drafted a proposed charge of responsibility for this committee?
No, we have not.
So that's something we would, if the board decides to go forward, we need to do. Okay, I just want to be sure.
The board, we could put together a board for ourselves and sit and get, but that we're not just looking for advice. We're looking for buy-in, and we're looking for a communication bridge, if you will. And I think that this can only happen with the select board's support, period. I don't think anything that we could put together on our own without your support would have the same effect.
For example, in our business plan, we did have an advisory committee that we wanted to form this spring, but that would be an advisory committee to us. This is not what we're talking about here.
Great.
Allison? John, you'll next.
So I still have a number of concerns. And Bill, just kind of for your edification, I actually served a number of years ago on the Prescott Building Committee for a year or so. So there's I have some personal background and knowledge as well. I think part of my concern is that the town is not particularly adept and does not have a strong track record as the owners of old/historic buildings. And I'm a little concerned that that's not a business we want to find ourselves in long term. But I think with what I'm really struggling with is that to date, the communication, the business plan, the lease process has largely been as it would be with any private entity and a landlord.
Mm-hmm.
To me, creating some sort of joint committee to create buy-in and support a private entity and kind of getting over the goal line, I don't understand what it is that Friends of Prescott, why would this group be entitled to this when we wouldn't put that together for the Groton Inn or some other private entity that felt like they weren't understanding how they need to proceed?
I understand the concern, I really do. And that came up the last time that committee was brought up about, I'm not sure which of you, but one of you talked about just that. Why would we provide that kind of support? I think it might have been you, John. Why would we provide that kind of support for a private entity? And that's my point. The goal of this, admittedly private entity, although of course nonprofit, the goal is to provide a public resource for the town, not only in the community center, which is kind of a nice little aside to use as we're actually trying to maintain the building for future uses of the town. If we can get this thing to be viable in terms of rental income going forward, you being the town, end up with a wonderful building that expands the possibilities and uses that might be made of it by the town, and you have an asset that's worth much more than you have now. In terms of the management, it seems to me that you put together this entire process, including the responses to the RFP and all. You've selected the Friends of Prescott to manage that for you. To your point, it would be too much of a task to ask of the select board or the town itself to manage that. But the Friends of Prescott, or if it's another group that decides through another RFP to become the manager of this property, provides you the ability to end up the building in a place that it becomes a valuable resource for the town without having to put in that people resource and financial resource necessary to run it as a town. So I totally agree, and I understand that the town hasn't had great success with that, and I'm not sure many towns have great success with that, to tell you the truth. I'm not sure it's a shortcoming here in Groton. But all I'm saying is, when you ask why would you support this for a private entity, you wouldn't support it for a private entity. You would support it for a public good. You would support it for a public outcome that would be a benefit to the town. And if you don't see, and that's the point, if you don't see that that would be the outcome, would be a public benefit for the town, then you can't support it.
I'll stand
Right,
for a follow-up.
I mean, I think you, for me anyway, kind of hit the nail right on the head. That, you know, with my background in professional property management, it will always require some involvement, regardless of how independently it is managed or would be run. I think that, you know, if we had no other projects or capital issues or things on the horizon, and our coffers were kind of in a more overflowing type of position,
Exactly.
I would have no problem supporting this. As it is, I don't see this ultimately being an asset to the town. And I think the amount of funding that we would need to put into it, whether it's through CPC or through annual capital support, is not anywhere near the top of my priority list at this point. So I think you're right that it's, you know, given that is my stance, it's probably not something I can support.
John?
I have several concerns, and I'll tell you right from the beginning, I don't support it, and I'll give you some of my rationale. First off, you're a private nonprofit organization. If we were to create a committee such as you request with you, we would need to be willing to do the same thing for any other nonprofit organization in this town. And I don't think we're fixed to do that.
No, I'm sure you're not. My only comment is that you would only consider doing it for a private nonprofit organization, just as Alice and I just spoke of, that's bringing an asset to the town. The purpose of this and the end game for this is a productive piece of property and resource for the town. And again, that's the whole premise. If that's not where you think it can get, I totally understand your lack of support for it. We happen to believe that it can. And we've had some bad luck with rentals because of some issues with the code and all of that. But we've had tremendous volume in terms of interest and people that would like it. We can't do anything at this point with the third floor, so and the basement is as any of you who have been in the building recently know, is a bit of a mess. But that's next on our agenda to try to move it along. But in that second floor, we've got some very good prospects that easily pay the rent. I mean, that's not even the problem. They pay the rent, but they don't pay enough to carry the whole burden at this minute in time.
I'm sorry, John has.
I'm sorry, John, I jumped in and talked too much there.
It's been my position since last May, when your president invited me to a meeting to go through a vetting as to my candidacy to be here. That you need to share the vision with the voters, and you need to get the voters to say what they want to do here.
Yep.
Right.
I agree with that.
And that has to happen. Fully transparent. How much of a dependency you think you have on CPC money, which, by the way, we were informed last week that the match for 2020 is 11.5%. we're gonna be forced to look at, do we keep funding that?
Sure.
Or do we direct those funds into other needs of the town? Because as a retired person, 11.5% is a good return, but for the town itself, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind the 11.5 myself.
So
But I hear your point.
that has to happen, and I just don't see that happening. And that's where the vision would get ratified.
Yep.
And the commitment of the community and the taxpayers
Yep.
to what's proposed would happen. And until that happens,
Yep.
I just don't see mixing town things and private organization things
Yep.
without the validation and desire of the town with a full understanding of
Yep.
risk and a full understanding of potential costs and potential profit, all those things.
Yep.
It makes sense to start working together. And the other part of that that concerns me is that doing what's been asked and requested here starts to give it the appearance of a public-private project. And until the voters say they want to do it,
Okay.
I don't want to see even, I don't want to see what looks like the beginning of a private,
Yeah.
public commitment to
Yeah.
do something here.
Yep.
Till we get the vote, we
I
get
hear
a
you.
vote
I
from
hear
the
you.
voters. I also want to point out that, a last thing, okay, and it's unrelated to this. You've heard, you pretty well understand where I stand. But given that we get into things without understanding whether we can or we can't, I'm hoping somebody has taken a look at the weight of the Book of Peace and ensured that structurally it can sit on the floor, on the first floor of the town hall.
You mean the Prescott?
I mean, I'm sorry, of the Prescott School, sorry.
It has sat
Okay.
on the gymnasium before.
It's a good point. It's an excellent point. And-
I don't know if
and I'm not
anybody's
sure
checked
anybody
that out
has.
yet.
Yes,
Sat in the gym for a long time.
Yeah,
It did. And and it's been up there before, but that
yeah, it's
that
been-
doesn't mean
it's
that
been-
it was in the gym safely, so
Right.
absolutely
No,
good
no,
point.
we have some,
Yeah.
we have
I'm all
some-
set.
we have some work
Becky?
on it.
So, John, I
Josh.
absolutely understand the point, absolutely. This committee is exactly what I'm asking for, is the kind of transparency you're looking for. This is the committee that can bring that kind of transparency between Friends of Prescott, not only to the board, but to other town agencies and to the town membership. general
We
town.
don't share that. You need to get together with the voters,
Yeah,
not another committee,
okay.
okay?
And
You need
the
to-
only other point too about your point about private and public, keep in mind that we're talking about a current public asset. This is not a group of private citizens trying to get together with the town to build something new, to buy something new, this is a current town asset. And it can go one of two ways. It can, well, more than two ways. It can be sold, obviously.
Several ways it
Yeah,
could go.
yeah, more than two ways. You know, but if it's to remain an asset of the town, we have to come up with something that makes it a viable asset for the town. And at the moment, we've got the only plan for that.
Becky?
So I would just like to speak a little bit about, from a different angle here. I think that we've had a lot of discussion about whether we should spend any public money in support of a nonprofit organization, as if this is a new question. And in fact, I don't think it's quite as clear, because I think we already are doing this in a number of situations. So, for instance, John, you mentioned the Grange is doing their townwide cleanup at the end of April. My understanding is that the town contributes to that by providing the dumpster and paying the fees for all the trash that gets picked up. We also have a nonprofit organization that does wonderful work in this town, planting trees, the Friends of the Tree Warden. And they work very closely with Tom Delaney and the DPW, who moves trees around, digs holes, uses their equipment, and coordinates with them for the planting of the trees. As I was parking outside tonight, I noticed that a banner is going up to promote the neighborhood food project, and I think that the town does, put a banner up for a number of different organizations at their request.
We charge a
People
$50 fee.
People pay to put those banners
$75, it
up.
went up?
Yep,
$75.
$75 to have
Okay,
that
all right.
posted.
Okay,
put up.
well, still, the town participates in that. At the Williams Barn, where we have the farmer's market, I know that the town has done repairs there in the past. A few years ago, maybe 8 or 10 years ago, maybe not that many, I'm not sure, there was a bit of controversy in town about the fairgrounds property and the organizations that were using the horseback riding facilities there. And a committee was formed, and the recommendation was to do essentially the same thing as this, which was to form a nonprofit organization and to lease the property to that nonprofit organization. That's the Hazel Grove Agricultural Association, and that's what the town proceeded to do. So the town owns the property, and they lease to a nonprofit organization to manage it. I've not heard much about that in recent years. I assume that it's working very well, since we haven't heard anything about it. And one last piece of information I'd like to share is one of our most successful nonprofit organizations in town is the National River Watershed Association. I think everybody knows the wonderful work that they are doing, and they are obviously totally self-supporting at this point. However, they were not in the early years of their existence. Marion started that organization in her living room, her kitchen, or her house. But at some point, as they were growing, they needed space. And they were offered free office space and office supplies at Fort Devens, offered that by obviously the federal government, who had no concern about the fact that you need to pay us, or we're mixing in with a private organization. They saw that there was benefit to the community. They provided free office space and and office supplies, and obviously the Watershed Association went on to grow, become exactly what they were aiming to do, and became self-sufficient and self-supporting, the way that the Friends of Prescott are hoping to do. So we're in the town, are in the early stages of what I do actually think should be a public-private partnership of sorts. And I think the committee that's being asked for is specifically to help with one of the areas that has been problematic, which is communication about, and with the building department, and about what the status is of what's allowed and what's the status is of what work is needed to be done. I think it would help us, rather than essentially put this on the town manager's shoulders, as it has been all along. I think it would be wise for us to consider appointing this committee that can kind of bring both organizations together and do some of the work in a way that doesn't always need to involve the top of the organization.
The chair would like to interrupt and request some clarifications. Mr. Delaney happens to be here. How much are the bin and trash fees that we do every year in support of the townwide cleanup littering?
Probably end up with half a dumpster or so of trash, maybe a couple $100.
And how much would it cost if your men and women were to go out and do the same work?
If we had time to do it.
People.
A few thousand.
All right. And can you explain the Friends of the Tree Warden and how that process works?
So the Friends of the Tree Warden assist us in talking with the public about fundraising to get money to fund for planting of trees and locations to plant trees. On the stuff that's on the public right of way. All the money they raise to buy trees to plant back on the side of the street trees in our commons and our parks.
And because it's on the public right of way, it's not legal for anybody but the DPW to do that digging, is that right? So we had the same issue with the stones, right?
Kind of, sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
And we also have a budget for it.
And we do put it in the budget every year that the town people vote on every year at town meeting.
Yep.
And the funding for the trees comes from contributions that people like myself
Yeah.
and others make to that organization.
Well,
How do we, Chair's not finished, how do we get Williams Barn, how does that figure in? And I know that there have been repairs over the years done to that.
Williams Barn was purchased with CPC funds, I believe, if not, when we originally purchased it.
It was purchased with Conservation Commission discretionary funds right before it went to auction. And then the repairs on the barn building were a Massachusetts Historic Preservation matching grant matched by CPC funding along with additional development funds, but
And
that's
it's
how that came
managed and
about.
controlled by the Conservation
So
Commission.
Conservation Commission, thank you.
Yep.
Then also town.
Do we have to pay anything for the Hazel Grove Agriculture Association
No.
upkeep?
Nope,
That's a lease
No
that they
tax
basically
paid
take
dollars.
care of it,
correct.
and do we get any revenue from that?
No.
No, but it's a pro quid pro, you maintain it.
Yep.
And it's done, and there's nothing there.
The money they make from renting their stalls, they pay for.
Pays for the maintenance of the property.
the maintenance,
But
okay.
There are no taxpayer dollars spent in Hazel Grove.
And then, we're this local municipal government, not the federal government. That's our taxes, the taxpayers come here that pays, out of their houses pay the municipal budget, and it's state income, it's federal income tax that pays the federal income tax budget, right, which we can't control and we don't have any say over, so. We're happy that Fort Devens took care of the National River Watershed Association, but I fail to see how any of these come close to the same level of what's being asked of the taxpayers here, and I just wanna make sure that we're all talking the same level. It's unreasonable to put out that we do this without understanding the facts behind it.
Could I?
This is a different project, and I think it should be understood on its own scope and its own presence, rather than trying to muddy the waters with things that might somewhat be detail specific difference. I'm gonna let other members of the board speak, and then we'll get back to you, Mary. Josh, you haven't had a chance to weigh in here.
You're right. So let me start with saying what I've always said. I fully support the concept of what the Friends of Prescott are trying to do with adult educational programming and a community center concept. I think it's great. We entered into a lease on that. I would like to correct a couple things in your letter, that the select board did not approve a building plan on March 25th. We approved a business plan.
That was my mistake,
I
typographical
just
mistake.
want to make sure for the record that if this gets entered anywhere, that we certainly did
business
not do
plan,
that, okay? I'm sorry to point that out, but I must. And that the concept of approving a Prescott Development Committee, without it going in front of town meeting, I have to agree with John on. However, the type of committee that we could approve might be a committee which could be the Prescott Business Plan Oversight Committee, which would be the business plan that this board approved, could have the town manager, a member of the FinCom, a member of the Board of Selectmen, and a couple of members of the Friends. And that would be working to support the lease, which this board approved, and the business plan, which this board approved. That is something I think that would make sense. However, if you wanted to go with a business development committee, this is now mixing a public-private partnership together, even though it's a 501c3 corporation, in a manner that gives preferential treatment, in my opinion, from the select board to a select nonprofit. And then you're gonna have other nonprofits reaching out, and as chair of a private nonprofit, then my nonprofit would wanna reach out for the same benefit. And I don't think that that's necessarily fair. However, with that said, if you wanted to put a warrant article together to bring to town meeting, in order to have town meeting say that the select board or the moderator should appoint a Prescott Development Committee, and those voters voted in favor of that, that's a whole nother story, okay? And I don't like being a landlord, and I mean that as a board member here of a building. We did get a couple votes from town meeting that said, do not sell Prescott School. We never got a vote from town meeting that said, create a community center. And while that's your vision of this, and it's working, and it's in its genesis at the moment, I think we have to be real careful as to how we work with this. So, as one member of this board, I'll volunteer myself up to work on an oversight committee to support the business plan and the lease that we signed, and would love to see, sorry about this, Bud Robertson, maybe step up to the plate, as a member of the finance committee, maybe, sorry about this, Mark, the town manager, step up to the plate, and maybe your treasurer, and
Yes.
one of the two of you individuals.
Yep.
I think that way it could be a committee that would help support the lease and the business plan. So, I could go on, but I think that gives the gist of where I'm at.
I thought I heard a motion in that. Did I hear a motion in that, or did I not?
Well, you haven't spoken yet, so.
Oh, I've
Yeah.
spoken plenty. I don't think anybody else will hear from me.
I'd like to hear a response
Allison.
from the
I'm
friends.
sorry.
Well,
well,
Mary.
that's a- Allison, do you want to defer to Mary?
Sure.
Mary?
I like what Josh has said, because I think he gets right to the point in that we have a lease with the town for a $2.2 million building. And we want to administer this building as carefully as possible, therefore we have a business plan, not a building plan, a business plan. People are saying that we're subsidizing Friends of Prescott, and I think this gets to the heart of some of the miscommunication. We have a lease, and it said that the town in the lease had 3 major responsibilities. One was its own insurance, which it would have whether we're there or not. The outside of the building, that was negotiated. The public parking lot, the grounds. And it also had major capital improvements, some of which were not identified before we moved in. That's what warrant article number 14 is about, and is now being seen that that the town is subsidizing us. These are town responsibilities, and a committee like Josh pointed out would help that communication. We have been working very hard to keep our end of the bargain up. That's inside the building. We've never said that a community center was the whole enchilada. That's not it. That's just part of the thing we love to do, and it's a payback to the community. We think that working together with you will get some of this lease and business plan stuff sorted out. So we'd be supportive of that, Josh. It gets to the same goal that I think Bill,
I
which
think
is
that
what Bill was trying to
the
point
term
out.
development is just a term. I mean, this is the meeting, that's the committee, Josh, that we talked about early on, was an oversight committee.
That was
No,
fall, last
I
fall.
get it, and I understand why you use the word development,
Yeah.
but we need to be careful as
Yeah.
a elected CEO body of the town, not to call it a development committee, because you don't want the misconception that
Offense.
we're supporting
Yeah.
Our development. I
the
get it.
development of that
I get
building.
it. It's a good
However, we need to support the lease and the business plan we approved. And if it, or at least working with you to be successful on it.
Yep.
So, like I said, take the development committee to town meeting, and if they vote in favor of it, then come back to us.
Allison?
So I'll point out, Josh, maybe you're not aware, that committee basically has been functioning. Bud and Mark and I, as a representative for the select board, and Mary and Bruce Eastham have met 5-10 times, trying to do exactly that. So I personally kind of failed. You're
sorry.
very powerful, and you can have my spot, but I don't know that that will make that much of a difference. You know, I think
I'm
Hey,
certainly.
hey,
at this point, you know, the Prescott building had a town-appointed committee to review and discuss and formulate plans to move forward. That group did their work. I'm not sure what a second committee would do. You know, at some point, whoever's going to operate a business needs to kind of stand on their own and do so. You know, for me as an individual, you know, I'm not hearing any concerns from other entities or individuals in town about communication with the building department. I think they've been pretty consistent and clear all along. I think, I'm concerned that your letter in the last item, number 2, still to me doesn't necessarily kind of hit the mark in terms of what needs to be done for it to be a mixed-use building with both business and educational. I think it's just time for Friends to kind of get on with the work of doing what it is you want to do and think you can do.
You guys love putting me in this position. All right, I'll take comments from the public. I see Jack with his hand raised.
So I wanted to address 3 things. One is the precedent for working with a nonprofit. Another is whether or not this is a public-private partnership, and the last is the idea that there might be some wisdom in sacrificing a small amount of town funds in order to achieve a larger end. So to the public-private partnership, Mark, could you bring up the RFP, which is under town manager documents for this? Thank you. And while you're doing that, I'll mention that the idea of sacrificing a small amount of town funds, as you brought up, Mr. Chairman, if the town were to have sold this building for $35,000 and then forego taxes for the 10-year TIF that it was going to grant, or most of the taxes for the 10-year TIF, the town would have found itself with maybe, over the course of 10 years, $60,000 in the bank. But had the town ever wanted to replace 4 acres on Main Street, or a building like this on Main Street, it would be spending far more than the $60,000 that it had in the bank, that it got the short money for trying to sell Prescott. So there is some wisdom in the cost benefit of investing a small amount of town funds. As far as a precedent for a town entity participating in partnership with a nonprofit that is trying to do something for that entity, for the town. I participate in Groton Dunstable Play. We're trying to fund an athletic field for the town. And the school department, the school district, has appointed a liaison to Groton Dunstable at Play to work with us to try to move that thing forward. So there's precedent for this. That doesn't mean that you have to do it, but you no longer have to be afraid that you're going to be setting precedent that you don't want to be found guilty of. Mark, would you please go to page 5 on the RFP? Thanks. The overview. I think it's page 5.
Too old to read that.
Yes, sorry, use objectives. So under use objectives,
Make it a little bigger, Mark.
Yep.
Sorry.
Would you blow that up, please?
this is the RFP that.
One moment, please. Let us get to where everybody can actually read the screen.
The document.
Anybody that doesn't have 90,010 vision?
I'm trying to figure out on this,
I think you're good. I can.
I want to make it
It's
bigger.
item number 4. Use objectives.
Down
Yeah,
there on the
there it
right,
Use
Down-
objectives for
down below.
Roman
bottom
numeral
right.
There it is. I knew it was going to come up eventually.
Plus, but there you
Bingo,
go.
thank you so much.
Eventually, I would figure out how to work a computer.
This is the RFP that 4 of you participated in creating and 5 of you blessed when proposals came in. This is your RFP. And this is the agreement that is found the basis for the submission by Friends of Prescott and the agreement between Friends of Prescott. And as you can see under the use objectives, the town had the intended purpose of enriching the lives of Groton residents with this RFP and asked someone to help them to do that. If that's not a public-private partnership, I don't know what is. Can you go to page 10, please? Overall rating. Let's see. Go up just a little bit, please, Mark. Thank you. So here you see that the town was not necessarily intending to maximize revenue coming in from Friends of Prescott. It was intending in this RFP, in its public-private partnership, to maximize the benefit to the citizens of our town by asking someone to come in and give them the best proposal possible to do that. Here you see that the highest rating in all proposals coming in, the highly advantageous rating would be one that gives is a proposal that maximizes the benefit to the town by having a positive social and program impact on the town and the neighborhood. So I don't understand how people can sit here and say this isn't a public-private partnership. I don't know how understand how you can say that the town has not asked for this to happen, when in fact you have asked for this to happen. It's no longer did town meeting want this, you sent out an RFP asking for this, and you got exactly what you asked for. And now you're banging the bejeepers out of these people for trying to give it to you. I find that incredible. And I just don't know how it is that you put these folks through this when all they're asking for is a little help. Thanks.
Marlena, please.
So I just wanted to clarify some things from my perspective as, and unfortunately, I only have one brain, which jumps from school committee and individual. So I'm not gonna say I'm speaking of either one. This is just how it's going to be. So there's a couple different things. To Jack's point, that RFP, as a taxpayer, and I respect every one of you individually, but I cannot agree with that RFP. Should never have been written like that. You do support a project that was never voted on at town meeting. And I understand that that's how we got to a lease that is actually very advantageous for a nonprofit group who is deeply dedicated to better the town. And I can appreciate that aspect, but what I can't appreciate is the fact that the taxpayers never actually voted on what to do with this building. And I think that if we bring it to town meeting, that's very disingenuous, because we should hold this as just as important as what are we gonna do with the country club? What are we gonna do with Prescott? What are we gonna do about marijuana sales in town? You did actual questions at the ballot to find out exactly what our what we really wanna fund, what we're gonna give up in sales, and that's how this should be determined. But in the meantime, you guys, you made your bed. Carry the lease. And unfortunately, you made a lease that said we're responsible. I'm responsible for paying these operation expenses. So unfortunately, I would cut my tax check and pay it, but you have to fulfill the lease. I don't see how any other way.
But I think, Marlena, what's before us right now isn't that piece of it. It's
Well,
the
yeah.
creation of yet another committee with public appointees to prop up a private entity that has a lease to do something specific that we'd like to see them do.
So once approved at the ballot, we should go whole far, straight ahead, full steam ahead. Everything that we have to do to get it done.
So if I recall, and that's a good corollary, the whole idea about the marijuana ballot was because people felt that there was a select board possibly acting on its own without the input of the people. And to me, that seems very similar to this. And I know the proponent of said ballot is the one who also raised the concerns. Well, you wrote this up, and it was your RFP, so you should just go forward. Yet, taking the same way. So we should really try to play things on the same level the whole time. And I concur with that assessment. I think there's holes no matter where you sit, and people are going to get riddled with them no matter what you do, because this is just a process that is ass backwards from the entirety of time immemorial. And you know, it boggles my mind that we sit here week after week after week just sitting through this and trying to figure out where to go next and where to go next without an official sanctified budget from town meeting saying that this can go forward. You know, I look at the library and how much the library does for us, for all of us. It gets funding from the state, it gets funding from the federal government, it gets funding from the town, it gets funding from trustees, and provides a tremendous amount of services, community services to the town for free. Some paid, but mostly free. We have a great entity at the Toomey Center, which also provides a community service and has classes that, Marlena, forgive me for asking, but at one point I thought that the Toomey Center was entirely self-sufficient.
Yes, the Peter Toomey Center is self-sufficient, and I had forgotten to mention, the school committee has a liaison for the GDA Play. It was Peter Cronin, it is me now. We support information coming from GDA Play to our school committee. We are not on any committee in regards to pushing the funds for GG at Play. We will allow them to come to our school committee, and we'll give them a platform to speak at, of course. They are also gifting the field to our schools.
Correct.
Once accomplished.
And that's been challenging despite many people I know in this room support and significant dollars here and there. And I hope that does get through one day. And that's actually part of my issue is that there's a lot of different entities in town, not-for-profits that need dollars to be, you know, part of this quote-unquote private-public partnership. Private-public partnership doesn't mean that you know, it typically means that a public entity will partner with a business entity, not a town will public with a not-for-profit. That's usually not the way I see a private-public, you know, stated. If I were looking at this in a business and I saw, despite what had happened in the past, even if I had a lease and I saw the amount of money coming forward, I would do a risk-benefit analysis and I may cut the lease and pay the penalties, because it's going to cost me far more money to maintain the building than I'm ever going to yield and benefit, right? And that's purely from a fiscal point of view. That's what you would be taught. I'm not saying that's what should be done here. I fully support. We made a lease, as I said 2 weeks ago. I think the town should maintain its commitment to that lease and give the Friends the opportunity to come forward and be successful in year 3, and then see what's going to happen from there. I do not approve of requesting any more of any select board member's time, although it's willingly given, or a FinCom member's time, or a town employee's time beyond what is done to help drive the success of that business plan. Oversight is a different world, and I can see the wisdom in you know, and I kind of thought we already had that because there was going to be a quarterly review. So I'm a little unsure as to what the nuances are. But I don't know how you can't find the same new blood that you asked for out of members of the community who are invested in this project, who would be willing and able to give you that development input. That absolutely.
We can.
But
the communication.
What that doesn't do is that doesn't give you the board's buy-in and approval, and I recognize that. That doesn't give you the symbolic
Or the communication.
recognition. And I know, I run change management, I run organizational behavior, I know exactly why we do this. If I were an executive and I were trying to push through a change, I would get buy-in from the right people and put them on a committee to run it and convince them first. I understand completely.
Yep.
It's a signal, it's a sign, it's psychology at work. And I appreciate the passion at which the members of this committee come forward. And I'm, you know, as I said, I still support the lease and allowing the Friends to go there. But I don't know that I would be willing to give my vote to a development committee that I'm not willing to take part in, that I wouldn't take part in on my own. I wouldn't volunteer anybody else for that. Josh, yes.
I'm really tired about talking about Prescott for the last 10 years, not just the last week. And I don't mean
I've only been a
No,
year and I'm
any ill
exhausted.
will whatsoever
I
on
was
this.
gonna, we agree.
I'm gonna offer a motion. I move that the board formally appoint a Prescott Oversight Committee to consist of 5 members, 1 member of the Board of Selectmen, the town manager, a member of the Finance Committee, and 2 members of the Friends of the Prescott. Under its charge is to support the business plan as submitted and approved by the Board of Selectmen, which it was at the Board of, Select Board, and the lease as executed by the same board. That's the charge.
Second.
Can I request a clarification wording? Can you define the word support, please?
Yeah, the words that are in the business plan is what we need to support, and
But-
nothing else.
But there's a lot in the business plan, Josh, that is futuristic. So we can't say every word, every
All
clause,
right,
every
I'm
sentence
willing to
that's in
accept
that
a friendly
document.
amendment to this. What I'm trying to do is, Allison has informed me that there is a standing committee which is not appointed by this board that does meet in order to help work with
I would
what's going
disagree
on.
with that.
I would like to make that a formal committee, is all I'm requesting. And if you wanna change the charge, create the charge, get it on the next agenda so you have time to work with it.
The select board did authorize Allison, myself, and Bud to work with the Friends of Prescott. I think that's what you're gonna probably say,
But
Mary.
not subject to the open meeting law.
Correct.
It's not a
It's not a
posting committee.
subcommittee.
So I want it to be a formal committee.
Of course, the Friends
Then we're accountable
may
to
not
the
wish this,
taxpayers.
so it's, you know, if you would prefer not to have this and would like to come back at another stab, you know, it's your call. I won't push anything down anybody's throat.
Yeah, no, I think Josh's proposal is excellent. I think that's
I-
just what we
I
need.
think what Bill was communicating was that we really want to communicate better and more smoothly and in advance of issues. The town has knowledge, we have knowledge, we have the inside of the building to run, you have the outside of the building to run. This could only help.
So I would
Josh,
just suggest that the town manager, working in conjunction with somebody, put together the, charge of the committee and the constitution, so to speak, of it, unless you wanna move forward with
Under
that.
the keep it simple principle, how's that different from a liaison? And why wouldn't we just go with the liaison like we have to many other public entities?
Because I would like to see this a committee that keeps minutes and that is accountable to the taxpayers, which are calling the expenditure of taxpayer funds into question on this building. And by keeping minutes and overseeing their business plan and what goes on a monthly basis or as often as the committee meets, gives accountability to the people who are throwing their, or spending their tax dollars, on this facility.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor, it's been made and seconded. We've had some discussion. I apologize.
I
thought-
did.
thought Becky-
I seconded
thought
it.
Becky had seconded it.
She did.
Is there any further discussion, any questions from other members of the board? John?
I'd like to see what document is gonna describe what the charter is for this committee.
So
The charge has to
before I
be
vote
written
on it.
still.
Yeah, so why don't you just authorize
Charge
me to
still has
draft
to
the
be
charge
written.
to bring it back to a future meeting? You don't need to take any votes right now. Just direct me to write a charge. I'll work in conjunction with the Friends, Allison and Bud, since we've been working together. I'll bring it back to you on April 22nd, so we can have our fourth straight meeting discussing Prescott.
Is there-
That's why I tried to get us to approve the committee, how many members it is tonight, and then just bring the charge back. And then we don't have to sit here and have another hour and a half debate
But
about a
until
committee.
you actually see what the charge says, how can the board vote on the committee?
Yeah, do we have consent that that's what we'd like Mark to do?
I do not.
Do I have, okay, well then let's take an official vote on whether or not we'd like to direct Mark to do that. So would you be kind enough to table your motion?
I withdraw my motion and move, that the town manager, draft a committee charge for the Prescott Oversight Committee, as well as its, constituent members, which I would suggest being 5-member committee.
It's been moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Anything from the public? Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposition?
No,
No.
I heard that 3-2 in favor. Thank you, Mark, for taking that on, and we'll see that on April 22nd.
Mr. Chairman, back to the town manager's report. Item number 3, you wanted to talk about the proposed ticket tax article, so I'll defer to you.
Yes, so, I'll just come right out and be direct. I think this should be removed from the warrant. And I'll tell you why. I had a very interesting, eye-opening discussion with, our State House representative, who reminded me the nature of politics. And, you know, I forget that sometimes I sit in a logical world and try to think things logically without remembering that we live in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts is full of politicians, many of them sitting in Beacon Hill. And it became clear to our representative that when the matter was surfaced to members of the potential committees that this would have to go through, that it would either go nowhere, or the more likely would be is that it would be called out as Groton attempting to Groton attempting to be mean to nonprofits, and that a potential representative could use that and bring to the floor to shut it down, just to say, look how good we are to nonprofits. And the likely outcome, because if it ever got out of committee, it would only get out of committee for that reason, would be that this would go nowhere. Regardless of the fact that we try to phrase it in such a way where it's not nonprofit selective, everybody knows and everybody's aware that this goes against a nonprofit, and that was its original intent, to try to get some revenue out of Indian Hills ticket sales. So I strongly encourage this board to open up the warrant and remove this from the warrant. A representative will take it forward. She'll do the bidding of the Groton, but it's she's saying it's a bad idea, and I concur with her assessment. Josh, I know you want to about that, so.
Well, I'm gonna do everything I can not to curse right now. It's amazing how, as chief proponent for this article, that our state representative would reach out and have a discussion with you, but yet wouldn't reach out to me. Maybe it had something to do with one of the digits on one of my hands, and the
I don't think it was perfect.
I'm gonna take this to a political level right now.
Josh, before you do, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I had many conversations with her, and I said to her, we need to get you and Josh together, and she'd be more than willing to talk to you about it.
That's nice. I'm gonna continue.
Okay.
And that we are in a very democratic state, and we have a Republican representative here that represents Groton. And it takes a lot of work in order to gain traction at the State House, especially that's controlled by the Democrats. And it takes a lot of hard work, and it takes a lot of clawing and scratching. But for every type of legislation that has to get approved at the State House, somebody has to go first. And while she may be right that it might die in committee, unless you have the intestinal fortitude to carry the torch to bring something forward that makes sense and be able to explain the rationale behind why something is being brought forward, then maybe one has to question if they should be a representative at the State House. And with that said, that if you don't have the gumption and the fire in your belly to bring forward something on behalf of a community that A, you live in, and B, that you represent at the State House, then as a select board member, I think we should bring this to town meeting, let the voters see if we want to petition this, and that if she wants some help in doing this, I'm offering my help. But I completely oppose the concept of removing this, Barry.
So I will clarify that at no point did our representative state that she would not bring this forward and wasn't willing to bring this forward. She was advising us on the realities of what happens when you bring this forward, and asking whether or not Groton wanted to end up in the front page of the Boston Globe as, you know, Groton mean to nonprofits. That's
Well,
the likely outcome, because this is not a logical thing. And you and I are on the same page logically on this, Josh, whether, you know, logically, when I look through this, this is a reasonable thing. But the fact is you understand as well as I do, the politics twists everything. And it's not gonna be seen that way. It's not gonna be delivered that way. And we don't have any control or say in that. So
Well,
I just think it's unfair to, I think it's unfair to challenge our state rep and what she is willing to do when she is giving us her experience and advice on what actually happens on Beacon Hill. I don't think that's fair and reasonable.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, Becky, thank you.
So I also would like to withdraw this from the warrant, but my thinking has nothing to do with what our state representative has said. I appreciate the information, but I reached this conclusion without even thinking about that. So I'd like to explain my thinking here. First of all, I think what we have written is not ready to go to the legislature. If we really want to do that, I think it needs to be worked on and made better. Our original focus on this was Indian Hill, and that our wish was to have some more income coming into the town's coffers dependably every year. I share that wish. I still think that that is something that we should look to do. This proposal, I think, was going to impose tax burden and a lot of work on smaller nonprofits, and I don't support doing that. Indian Hill will be a different organization when they come here. When they open, they will be in the same league as the two private schools, Lawrence Academy and Groton School, in that they will have a very large budget, a large paid staff, and a large impact on our town. Both a large impact on services and, I think, a large impact in the reputation that our town has and the prestige that our town has. But as such a large organization, they will inevitably have more demand on town services. So I think it is fair to want some revenue to come in from them, some way to have revenue come in from them. What I would like to explore more, and I think we have not done that yet with Indian Hill, is the possibility of them doing what Lawrence Academy and Groton School do, of contributing a voluntary payment each year, a payment in lieu of taxes. I think that this, asking Indian Hill to think about doing that, to consider doing that, to look at their facts and their revenue projections, and explain to them the importance to us of having them do that. I think that's better than imposing a ticket tax, which would affect other organizations also. I do think that it could help in mending some of the bad feelings that came about during the building permit negotiations on both sides. If we hold off on the ticket tax and we approach Indian Hill about considering a pilot payment. I also want to point out that I think that if we do bring this to town meeting, it will be very contentious, it will be very, very time-consuming, and if it is defeated, we will have lost the opportunity to pursue that for at least, I think, 2 years. You can't bring the same thing up
It's
again.
a general bylaw, Becky,
Not a zoning article.
Well, in any case, I think that we would be better off removing it from the warrant at this point and pursuing what is already established as a pattern with the largest nonprofits in our town, of inviting them and exploring with them the possibility of a pilot payment.
I agree. Allison?
So first, I guess I'm frustrated to hear that at this point, Becky, that you're feeling like this isn't ready for prime time, when we've been discussing this for a month, and I don't think you've been.
I think that's a fair criticism.
Forward with gusto.
I think that's a fair criticism, and I spoke last week and said I was having trouble with it, and as I thought more about it, I figured it out, and I should have done that earlier.
Yep, and I'm sure that as soon as I open my mouth, I'll be the next one to be in exactly this position. I recognize that as well. You know, to me, if the representative or someone else came forward and felt like this is a change that should be made to make this more viable, or, you know, this isn't the right time, but 6 months from now or a year from now, this will have changed and that will be different, you know, that would potentially be something really worth thinking about, unless there was something to indicate that, Barry, and it doesn't sound like there was. At this point, I'm with Josh, that someone's got to open this door, and you know, I certainly don't ever want to see the town negatively portrayed, but if that's the first step to perhaps other towns expressing an interest and starting to look at this more seriously, then I think we should still move forward.
John, do you want to weigh in here at all? You're welcome to sit it out, it's okay. You don't have to
No,
build in this
no.
quagmire that I got created.
No. As I think most of you know, I'm a big believer in letting the voters decide. And that's pretty much where I'm at with this. I don't believe that if this ever gets through the legislature, more than one sentence in the entire document that they put out will mimic what's in here. So I'm not terribly worried about that at this point. The only thing that concerns me is we have so many things to work on in this town that putting a lot of effort into this, are we are we okay with the fact that it's gonna take time away from, other things that we could be working on? But that's more, again, for the voters to decide as far as I'm concerned. So I would support this to go to town meeting and let the voters decide whether they wanna go through with it or not.
Okay. I've heard all I need to hear. On to item number 4.
Yep,
Wait.
Barry, you asked that I put the,
Wait,
No, we're gonna move forward. It's gonna stay on the warrant, and you'll have your chance at town meeting to yay or nay it.
Public meeting, Deb.
Fine. There's no motion, but go ahead.
Well, I would support your offer to withdraw this. I did view your minute of the, I reviewed the procedure last week, and what concerns me is the misrepresentation and the mischaracterization of the Indian Hill, because we all know that this is a targeted tax that is targeting one particular institution, even though you're trying to mask it as being for all nonprofits. Where the state has not even, where the legislature has not even determined its own criteria for the kind of tax that you're asking the state to consider. I think that the town is already looking very anti-nonprofits by the very initiation of this article, and I couldn't agree more with you putting the cart before the horse. And as Bud had said last week, the town hasn't even developed its own criteria for a ticket tax, let alone they expect it to go to the state. So how is the town going to convince the state to impose a ticket tax when we haven't even established our own criteria for it? So and it's going to be years before one ticket is going to be sold here. So what is the hurry? Why are you pushing this at this point? I understand that you're trying to be proactive, but at the same time, you really do look in a bad light. It's very discouraging to see how pejorative this board's attitude is towards an institution that is only going to be bringing good things to this town. It's a wonderful institution. It creates beautiful music. It has it's an educational institution, and the lack of appreciation for the investment that is being made here, you're confusing fees, taxes, and investment. And I think that is a very unproductive way of approaching an entity such as this.
Barry, could I just suggest something that might be a bit of a compromise here?
So this is gonna go forward to town meeting. I'm
Well,
not sure what they're gonna be suggesting, and everybody's gonna get to debate the
I
same
was-
things again at town meeting.
I was going to suggest that, to John, that I think that the voters would be very happy if we were to, if Indian Hill were to end up offering a payment in lieu of taxes, and that maybe we should spend some time on that and postpone this. We can always bring this to the fall town meeting if that were not the case, and then the voters could weigh in on whether they wanted to do it at that point.
I'm of the opinion that it could be done in parallel. This, if the town votes to, will go to the legislature in Boston. They may or may not look at it over the next 18 months before they adjourn. And then if you want it started over again, you go back to ground zero and begin to push it again. So it's conceivable that a significant amount of time could slide under the hull here.
Bless you.
As this effort unfolds over time. I believe it would be possible to approach and work something out with the Indian Hill organization to perhaps do what the two other private educational organizations in town, the two major ones, are doing. And
But
that's
I don't know that
helping
I don't know that they would have any particular interest or incentive in doing that if we're simultaneously promoting a ticket tax. I think that's an odd position to deal with.
It's a fair statement.
We'll see what the voters say.
Well, the voters, we could ask them in the fall, is what I'm suggesting, John.
Josh?
Yeah, to address a couple of the things that Anna brought up. First of all, the reason to start this process now is because it will take years to get this through, A. B, that the end user and not the nonprofit is the one that's gonna bear the cost of the ticket tax. And that while the way you worded what you did, but we're masking this to point it at Indian Hill. Well, we had a mask that was wrapped around our heads, and let me finish, Anna, please. We had a mask that was wrapped around our heads in terms of an organization that refused to tell us what the cost of their development would be. Refused
excuse
to
me. Do I
tell
need to get
us
the gavel?
what the cost.
We will only have one at a time.
Yes. I mean, this is civil discourse 101 here. And that you had an organization that refused to disclose to a building commissioner and a building department what the cost of a building development was going to be. And put this board in an onerous position to have to negotiate a fee reduction for a building permit, which I regret to this day. And you can look at this as being a punitive action for that. However, any outreach by either the town manager or myself to have any negotiations with any representatives to get a pilot payment in place with Indian Hill has not been responded to. Therefore, it's very important to use whatever leverage we can get to get back the tax dollars that the taxpayers of Groton were deprived of through the building permit fee. And if you imply or apply this ticket tax across the board uniformly, the end user will bear the cost. And if somebody wants to spin it that we're being punitive to a nonprofit organization, they can spin it however they want. They can plaster it on a billboard across the state. But the fact is that the end user bears the burden, Anna, and I think that we need to move forward with this.
Anna, you'd like to respond?
If I could, thank you, and I apologize for interrupting. As I say, you proved my point that you are confusing taxes and fees when you make that statement. And that is exactly what you as a board is obligated to help the public and educate the public as to the distinction between the two. It is you who have stated that you are aggrieved with how the building fee was negotiated. But that was through no fault of the Indian Hill. That was purely by the tactics that this board approached the organization with. So to put the Indian Hill in such a bad light over your, as a board, your poorly executed negotiations is wrong. And to be initiating this tax, which is a tax, as opposed to your grievance over a building fee, is miseducating and misguiding the public and misrepresenting Indian Hill.
Barry, I'd like
If
to.
I may clarify, I believe it was this board's negotiating that actually allowed Indian Hill to get a permit and be here. So I'm not exactly sure how that was done. I will be fair to Indian Hill, stating that Indian Hill, actually the organization had nothing to do with the building fee itself. That was the sponsor of the building, who wishes to remain anonymous. And we dealt with his general manager. I think we're straying off topic, and these are good debates to have at town meeting, if we were to go into this more. Becky, do you have anything that's new to add specifically regarding Article 10?
I was just going to comment that I don't think anyone who was not in the room has the ability to know what exactly went on in those negotiations. And I think the people who were in the room, each of them all have probably very different opinions also.
Okay,
Have we released those minutes?
They're released.
yep, they are public.
That's what I thought.
All right, so this is going to go to town meeting. I am going to officially change my position to no on this, Mark.
Okay.
I'm also a no.
Oh,
And I think Ms. Pine is also a no on this.
we have you
100%.
down as a no, we had you at town meeting, so we'll change you to a
Yeah,
no.
I'm changing, I'm no.
So, thank you for that. Appreciate the board's willingness to debate this. The reason I put the next item on the warrant, or on the, on the agenda was because before I left, we hadn't taken position on Prescott funding. And then when I saw the results of,
Hold on a
Sorry.
second, this, now that the board, based on that, the board does not recommend Article 10, 3-2. Because you have Barry,
No,
oh, wait a minute.
no,
no.
I think it's the other way around. If I,
Oh, I had 2 in favor, 1 against, 2 deferred. So, John, you are still deferred until town meeting, or are you in favor of the article? Because I have you deferred. I wanna make sure I get this right. But right now, it's 2-2, with you at town meeting.
Where do you have me?
For it. You and Allison for it.
I was for it at the reduction down to 50-something.
No, no, no.
No, 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 we're talking about the ticket tax.
Article 10.
Still
Oh,
on ticket
sorry.
Don't
tax.
change your opinion on that,
Switching gears
Josh.
here, you lost me there.
All right.
So, John, you were at town meeting on the ticket tax.
you don't have to change right now if you don't.
I just wanna know what I'm gonna do. I wanna make sure I have this right.
Appreciate that. It is going.
I'll stay at town meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so it's 2-2-1.
Favor, 2 against. Make that 2. All right, sorry.
No, thank you for making sure we got that right. Appreciate
All right,
that.
so, and now Barry, you're talking about Article 14.
I'm talking about Article 14. So, before, I wasn't at last meeting, there were some numbers and nuances that weren't available, so just to give something that could go into the warrant, knowing time was the essence, I said I had to be at town meeting. But when I saw the board's positions, 2 in favor and 2 against on Article 14, I felt like I had to hear that debate, or at least some of the reasoning. I don't want to rehash everything. I did understand it, but you know, my question here is there any interest in not? So my first question is there any interest in not putting this on the warrant? And if that's not the case, then I'd love to hear a reason why I should support it at the current levels.
Okay. I have no interest in taking it off the warrant, and I would suggest that we need to include it on the warrant, and I would ask you to support it. We need to honor the lease that we signed. We own the building, and in fact, let's not forget, there's a totally empty floor. The top floor is totally empty. So if we had a vacant building, we would have some of these charges. This is, a number of the repairs are for safety, a number of them, they were unanticipated, but they're definitely building maintenance. If we're gonna keep this building in decent shape, even if it does not end up happening as had planned, it doesn't serve us well to let it deteriorate. So I think that we should support the request, and some of the items were removed. The Friends of Prescott offered to take on the responsibility for some of them.
$6,800, correct?
Barry, if it helps you, the Finance Committee voted 6 in favor and 1 deferred on that article, along the lines of what Select Board Member Pine is saying, to fulfill the town's lease obligations.
Is the FinCom aware that the second floor is not under the
Fully
lease?
aware, fully aware. I had a long discussion with them at their meeting last week when they took these votes.
So, my challenge with this is that we're talking about putting money into a floor that nobody rightfully can access.
Well-
And
No, this article does not do that. This
the alarm
article,
system doesn't put money into that second
No,
floor,
this
the
article does
alarm
not cover
system-
the alarm system.
Alarm system's not
The
part
alarm
of it.
system's not part of this.
so it will not be part of this, okay.
It is not.
All right, that was.
Could I also add one other thing, Barry?
Sure.
I know we've totaled up how much we've spent at the 2 previous town meetings. But the town meeting a year ago, I think it was 30,000 or 32,000, something like that. I remember presenting that article to the town meeting. The reason for that was that we were in a period of time when the building commissioner had said nothing could happen in the building until the process of clarifying or the change of use was complete, and that was going to take another 2 or 3 months. The school department was going to move out. We were going to have 2 months of total vacancy, and we had to cover costs for that.
That's what the original 32 was, and then we
Yeah.
came back in the
Yes.
fall with the additional 30, because we had signed the lease, and that was what we thought our 3-year costs were. Correct me if I'm wrong, bud.
Yes.
I've lived through this, so I appreciate
Yep.
the history lesson, but I've been there every step of the way, and I have a good recollection on it. Allison, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so to kind of provide a little different perspective, there are a number of things on the list. I don't know, Mark, whether you have that list
I can get it
at
up.
your fingertips.
Put it at the back up.
There are a number of things that we would not need to be doing or funding at this point if it weren't a leased building. I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head probably 2 hours ago at this point. And you're thinking that if we were looking at this lease in private industry, you would look at it, you would say, there's no way it can be profitable, and you would be willing to consider doing whatever to kind of get out of it. This building is following in the footsteps of other older buildings that the town has owned in the past, in that it's costing far more than anticipated, and that expenses and surprises are coming up every day. This still, before it was kind of the idea of putting in $60,000 over several years to get to a point where decisions could be made, and now we're creeping upward very, very rapidly. And I just think that until we have either some assurance that the town is going to vote to fund the ultimate renovation, that we're edging up into too much money to be spending on a building whose future is so uncertain.
Yeah, Josh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the way that you had worded the position, and I guess, that I said I was against. And what I stated last week is, in order to meet the obligations that we're looking for, year 1 needs is what we're currently in, correct, Mark?
Mm-hmm.
Year 2 needs is for the fiscal year that's under consideration at this upcoming town meeting, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, the collective number is $70,000. If you yank out or pull out the things that Friends said they would be responsible for, is that all within current year? And
Actually, it's years 2 and 3.
so if you pull out the portion that goes like the gym light replacements and the various things along those numbers, I'm coming up with $70,000 for this current year and next fiscal year. There's $21,000 left over in the, no?
It'll be gone.
Well, yeah, but that 21,000, Tommy,
Is
takes care of some of the
represented
stuff.
by
in
the
year
numbers
one.
that's in 19.
It takes care of some of the stuff in year 1,
So if
Josh,
you take
yeah.
care of some of that, that brings the number down to $50,000.
That's correct.
If you pull the numbers that are in the things that Friends accepted for years 1 and 2 down, then that's a number that I will support, because that meets the town's obligation for the lease.
No, it doesn't, because in year 3, we still have to fund those
Hold on a
other
minute,
things.
hold on a minute. During the current fiscal year that we're going to town meeting for, we go to town meeting for fiscal 20 in the spring of 19.
Correct.
So, whatever happens in year 3, and since this ever seems to be a moving target as to how much it's gonna cost, well, you may come back to us and say that number in year 3 is $78,000, or you might come back and say it's $15,000. You're gonna come back and say there's a number, but let's go for a separate appropriation. So, for me to portray that I'm against something that last week I advocated for, which is to fulfill the town's obligation for the lease, then I suggest that you change the number to go through the end of fiscal 20.
But the board's vote was to fund all of our obligations under the lease and that number is $77,000.
So say
And
fund all
that's what
the
you were against, though.
obligations of the lease through the end of fiscal '20.
But that's not what the board voted.
Yeah, he can't make that change without the board. And that's kind of one of the reasons I'm sitting here wondering, you know.
I'm asking
where
you
we're
as a board, would you be willing to entertain that? And maybe you'll get a higher level of support for this.
I think you might get a higher level of support for it, because you're not actually predicting clearly what the cost would be, so.
Well, you're specifically stating that it would fund the requirements to the lease for the building maintenance, unanticipated building upkeep costs through the end of fiscal '20.
No, that's not what this article says. This article says, if you read the summary, it's to fund the town's expected cost through the 3-year lease that we signed, and that's the $77,000 number. That's the number the finance committee voted 6-0 to 1 to support.
Yeah.
At $77,000. The reason I put you down as against, Joshua, is because you didn't support it at $77,000. I don't know how, I didn't know how else to depict your vote.
I just think
I
that
think
this
too,
is.
Josh, if you look at year 3 of the 35,000, 30,000 of it is the insurance, the snow plowing and the mowing, that we know we're on the hook for.
I just think it's a moving target.
If,
And why do you need to spend $500 for a fire alarm inspection for an alarm that you don't have?
We took, that we, huh?
There's one there.
Yeah.
I don't mean to make a joke of that. That's the last thing I'm trying to do here.
There is a fire alarm system in there, it's just not,
Code compliant?
well, it's code compliant for certain uses. It's not, it doesn't have enunciators in every room, and for the class, for business class, it's adequate. For, you go beyond that.
Education
for
class,
use,
it's not.
Then it's not adequate.
That's correct,
That's-
son.
Bud, and can I ask you a question before why wouldn't we wanna put this transfer from free cash to a capital stabilization fund, and then fund this as part of the capital plan? And that way put a 2/3 bar for funding for these types of things?
Mark can correct this, but this is not capital.
There's nothing capital in here?
No, matter of fact, it's all, I would call
This is
it
what we call
minor capital
operational.
at
It's
the
not even
biggest
minor
part.
capital, it's to pay insurance.
No, I
it's
meant
to
if
pay-
the stuff that wasn't
Well,
insurance, it's whatever.
It's minor capital.
The fixes, the panel work and
That's
the wall
maintenance.
repair, that comes out of operating?
We pay for
Yeah.
that out of our operating budget now, for this building, police, fire, everything. It comes out of Tom's
But
building
when we,
maintenance budget.
but see, I'm confused, cause when we paint, when we paint or pave the police station, that comes out of capital.
That's a capital budget.
So I think, I'm getting a little confused, there's a blurred line, I mean, things that rise in level.
I think
And it
that's,
does seem to be that some things require 2/3 and some things don't. And honestly, my goal is to try to give the people the best voice possible on whether or not they wanna spend this money.
to be consistent with Prescott,
Yeah,
every other request has been out of free cash. I would say all of a sudden to change the quantum of vote at town meeting for the same process, we just need more money. I don't think that's correct. I think you need to leave it with the same quantum that you've had all along.
I appreciate that reasoning. Okay,
Yeah, and
thanks,
when we
Bud.
discussed it at the finance committee, it was, it was a contract that in fact, we believe the town had signed legally, and
Yeah.
therefore Prescott, Friends of Prescott needed a runway, as you and I, not you and I, but you were at the meeting where we discussed 6 months doesn't make a 3-year
Right.
plan. And that's clearly the case here. The other thing is, when you look at these expenses, the biggest change when you look at years 2 and 3 is in fact the insurance change. That's the biggest change, and that's the one that's driving most of the change in years 2 and 3. 30,000, I think Josh mentioned, or Allison, 30,000 of year 2 and year 3 is the snow plowing and the building insurance, and the building insurance, was more than double what we expected. So that's because of the timing of when that
Right.
insurance policy came in. So that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about operating expenses, we're talking about changes that occurred after the fact, sad to say. And all the capital, all of the fixes to the building, the non-capital fixes to the building, have basically happened, except for a few at the bottom here, if you look at that chart. The rest of them are all done, and they're already in the $40,000 that we've spent. The stairs and all the top of that, all the way down to, I think, the pumps are done.
Yes, the electrical panel's gonna be done next Saturday.
So it's,
Okay, no,
Yeah,
and so we said,
So
let's
how do you
move
feel,
on,
Barry?
it's
we've signed it, and it's maintenance, it's not maintenance, it's basically insurance and plowing.
So, yeah, I mean, to be consistent with the vote on supporting the business plan, to support the lease, I'll be in favor of this at town meeting.
Okay. So the vote is recommended.
Vote is recommended, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, that
Are you
concludes the town manager's report.
Well, can I ask another question? I'm
Sure.
sorry to keep going on
That's
this.
okay.
But in the letter that Friends of the Prescott gave to us this evening, they asked us to add the fire alarm.
We
in.
got
No,
I got an email from
They
Mary
took
after
out.
that
They
withdrew it.
changed their mind.
I told the board that last week.
They changed their minds, they
Yep,
said no.
I told the board that last week,
I
Josh.
missed that nuance too, sorry about that.
All right. I'm gonna think about this until town meeting. I'm at town meeting.
You're at
Change
town
my
meeting
note
now?
at town meeting.
Sorry, Don.
No, we're gonna change it right now.
John?
I just want to make a point. Maybe I spend more time than others looking at the bills that come in from attorneys. We have an obligation here.
Yeah.
And failing to
Don't do it like this.
hold up what we're responsible for is not only a bad example for the town in general, but it exposes us to potential legal claims.
Right.
And I guarantee you, if that were to happen, we would go through this amount of money in about 3 weeks. All right.
That's why I changed my position, so I could think about it.
No, that's fair. Thank you, John. Appreciate that. All right, thanks for hearing me on these 2 items. Yes, Connie?
The board recommends it 3 in favor, 1 against, 1 deferred to town meeting, so it's a recommendation from the board, from the select board to support the article at town meeting.
Thank you, Connie. Apologize for the confusion that I created. All right, on to, why don't we do ongoing issues before we go to other business?
I have no updates on the ongoing issues, Mr. Chairman.
How is when is the Florence Roche feasibility study next meeting?
We meet next on April 23rd.
Cool, okay, great. Okay, Allison, why don't you do your item first, because that's gonna be disposed of quickly.
Yes. So I had spoken with the attorney doing the investigation early last week and the end of the week before. Both times they assured me that they would have the final report at the end of last week. They did not deliver that and notified me on Friday that they were in fact not even finished with their process of interviewing folks. So I have yet to resolve that with them other than to express extreme frustration and say that we have nothing to discuss this evening, hopefully for our next meeting.
So that'll go back on to the 22nd agenda, is that accurate?
Yes.
By which time we will have review and consideration of investigation report. Yes, John?
Let me point out that in the document that just floated up and down here, there was a bill from that law firm exceeding $5,000 so far for the work that's been done.
Correct.
The board authorized up to 10,000.
Yeah, we were.
Well, I just give everybody an
Yeah,
accounting as to
absolutely.
where we're at spending.
So
Appreciate that.
is it,
Yes, Becky.
before, I guess I would like to know, and maybe nobody knows the answer at this point, what the process will be when we do get that report.
The
So-
process is stipulated in the charter there.
No, not for a public open meeting investigation.
Right,
This is,
this is different
This
than
is,
what's in the
no.
charter.
fortunately, we can decide, maybe the right thing to do is decide on a process, for review where I can maintain decorum and conduct, throughout the time to make sure that we get to the end of it. Cause it's not purview to the charter, in
So,
my opinion. If you have an argument otherwise, Josh, I'm happy to hear it.
It's not an argument.
I mean,
If you have
It's
knowledge of the chart.
it's knowledge of the charter, and my understanding is that under the investigations policy, which this was conducted under the investigations policy, that a copy of the findings has to be discussed by this board, posted in the library, posted in the town report, and one other location which is not coming to my attention. However, in so much as any action the board may take relative to the findings of that, if it's personnel related, that action would be done in executive session, unless the person in question wanted it done in public session. However, the results of the investigation are clearly stipulated in the charter, and if you don't know how that works, then I would suggest talking to Labor Council or talking to Town Council relative to how we release the findings.
So I was planning on following the investigation policy. Rather, which I don't think it mirrors the charter, but, it does indicate about the publication, absolutely.
Well, my question
But
was,
I was more concerned about the review process. I think Becky's question was more, how are we gonna do the review? How are we handling that? What do we do
Right.
there, right?
are
Rather
we
than
gonna
what happens
just get it
after
at
the
a
process.
meeting and put it on the screen and all of us read it at the same time, or are we going to,
I think it would be a,
No, I mean, item number 6 says, upon receipt of the written findings, the chair shall forward the findings to each member and promptly place the item on a board meeting agenda, just like we would anything else in our packet.
oh, okay, so we will get it ahead of time. I just
Yes.
asking.
If they should ever actually finish it, yes.
Okay, I was just asking, because when I saw it on this agenda, I thought, we're gonna get it?
Well,
and
that's
what-
because they promised it to me by Friday.
Right, okay. So we will get it to read before we come into the meeting, presumably.
If we're still on the board, yeah. The rate they're going.
So, Josh,
Yes.
there's the section of the charter you're
Yeah.
talking about.
summarizing the results of investigations. The whole report doesn't get put there, but a summary,
In the
Of the
next annual
results.
town report, but the whole,
whole report.
Copy of the
a
full
cop,
text of
the results of
report.
any investigation have to be placed on file in the office of the board.
It's very clear.
Is the
Just-
town manager a town agency?
The report on the results, not necessarily the report itself.
Copy of the full text of the report.
Let.
It's a personnel matter, so I'd
Can
be
we
very
let
careful.
Vice Chair Manugian
These are not
contact Town
claims
Council to
against
see the
I know,
procedure?
this
Town
does
council or
not,
labor council?
this is not the
No,
right
this is,
section of
this is
the
a
charter.
doubtful claims against the town. This doesn't
Both
apply.
of them. Town.
This is the charter we're looking at right
Yeah,
now?
this
Yes,
is
the
about
charter.
claims against the town.
I think clarification from Town
Well-
Council, not Labor Council, on section E, in terms of town agency, is that an employee or not? Is the office of the Board of Selectmen a town manager or town agency? I don't know. So we need an interpretation of that, because we wanna make sure we follow it if we have to, and if we don't, and it's personnel related, then we don't. But we need to know what we gotta do before we have it. Last thing we wanna do is be sitting here and do something wrong with it.
I agree.
Yeah.
I will reach out.
Thanks, Allison.
So you were
If need
suggesting
support from
reach
Brian
out
Mazur,
to
feel free
regular
reach
town
out to
council?
Regular town council. I mean,
Did you
this-
get that, Alice?
Yep.
That's your choice. I mean, if regular town council can't answer the question, then I think you have to go to Labor Council.
Okay,
May I ask another question on this?
absolutely,
particular issue?
please.
When the board receives a copy of that report in the packet, is it a public document? Or is it a public document, is it ever a public document because it has to do with personnel? And if it's not a public document, does that mean the board can't share it with the public until such time as this board discusses it in public?
I guess
I
we,
will seek clarification.
Thank you.
Clarification.
I'm asking for that
If
clarification
you
too.
can send me an email or whatever with your specific.
Mark, I understand your questions, and that's why we really need to go to council on
Oh, I agree 100%.
it, okay?
I think,
Not that I'm worried about the outcome of the investigation.
No,
just
I
wanna make sure it's
understand, but it's
I think that-
procedure.
I think the council also has to recognize that we handled the request for such investigation in public session. I think it was not done in,
Yep.
in executive session. Okay. Any other questions, concerns, comments on what we're gonna do on the 22nd? I'm looking forward to that day greatly.
Gonna be in town?
Here?
Maybe not, thank you.
Check it.
Yes, I plan to be present on the 22nd. Okay, so, last week, I'm ready to move on, just apologize. Last week, the board received,
2 weeks, 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, excuse me, thank you, copies of the, summary performance evaluation that I compiled from members, individual and not public responses of their evaluation. I would like to caveat to say that our policy is such that those reviews, that only the summary evaluation becomes a public document, and those reviews do not become public documents. Please refrain from mentioning reading through your entire evaluation or mentioning in public, especially if you have any comments from a private individual in there, which were never intended to be made as part of the public document. Allison, you have a question before
Nope.
I finish? Oh, okay.
I just wanna be first in.
Okay, you can be first in line. The policy clearly states, our review policy, or our, sorry, summary evaluation policy clearly states that the board will, I'm done with my job, right? My job is done. The board now gets to decide on any request of amendment, and the board gets to decide by majority vote if the amendment goes in or not. It's not up to me, it's not up to the chair. I will be happy to continue to do the work, we'll call it the administrative work of adding or deleting comments if you'd like stuff removed or added in. But at this point, I'm just a member of the board like any of you. So Allison indicated her exuberance for going first, and I appreciate that. Please do so.
So I just want to thank you for your taking on of this task. Not that you have much choice in the matter, but I think you did a very good job capturing intent and nuance, and I, for one, was very pleased with the kind of the pieces that were pulled out of my review and included. And I think as presented, it's a very thorough and reflective document. I appreciate your efforts. I have no changes.
Thank you.
recommend.
I will say that I tried very hard to make sure that everybody, as the policy says, was equally represented and their comments were equally weighted where appropriate. And so that everybody felt like they were part of the summary evaluation in many cases. Becky, yes.
I also appreciate the work that you did. I do have one request. I would like to ask that all of the 4 checklists where we filled out numbers, or checked on numbers, and the 2 summarizing charts, that we use the same format that we had used that was used in the past. I'm not talking about last year, because last year was different, and for the benefit of the public, I'll just state the difference last year was that as we were partway through the process of doing this, there was a ruling from the Attorney General's office that in essence said that we had followed the process that was the correct process up until that very point, but something changed. And in order to not be in violation, we released all 5 of our individual evaluations, and we did not create a summary last year. So I'm talking about the process that was used, or the format that was used 2 years ago and 3 years ago. And on those checklists, and I have copies so that you all know what I'm talking about. The previous evaluations are public documents, anyone can see them. The initials were put where people voted, and I think that is, we owe that to the townspeople, greater transparency to show, and so we can each see where each other voted, and the public and also can see how those votes
So in
came
my
down.
opinion, that's a violation of the open meeting law to see where everybody else voted. And that if I put them on there, I would have violated the open meeting law. What I did.
I don't understand how that could be a violation.
Can I help, Barry?
Yeah,
Because I
please.
understand this. Because up until the town of Wayland created a situation which required a summary review, which is the process we follow now, which was changed by town council at the time to reflect what the Attorney General's office said, it was okay for us to do exactly what was here in 2016, to put our initials, because a summary review wasn't required. So nothing was wrong with what was done in 2016, but you could not do that now in 2019.
I spoke to Brian Mazur, and I asked, because I didn't want to bring this forward if it was prevented by law. He said, no, that's totally fine.
Well, Board members, you've heard the request. If you would please make it in the form of a motion so the board can consider it.
Yes.
I will then take the initiative of responding to that request and why I did what I did.
I'm not advocating something that is illegal, and so I'll make the motion. If we need to get further clarification about whether it's legal, then I would suggest that's fine to do. My feeling, particularly when we get to the overall performance rating, to just say that
Becky, do
there's...
you have a motion?
I'm sorry. My motion, I move that we include the spread of individual votes on all of the checklists. And I will further specify that if it is legal, I would like individual members identified as they were 2 years ago. If it is not legal, I would like just X's showing the spread of votes. And I would like to explain a little bit more why I think this is so important.
Well, wait, there's a motion on the table. Is there a second? For purposes of discussion, the chair will second.
So for instance, thank you, Barry, I appreciate that. In the overall performance rating, the way you have created it, it says that there was a select board majority in one category.
In each category, there was a select board majority, correct?
But there's no way for the public to know whether that's a 4-to-1 majority or a 3-to-2 majority or a 5-to-0 majority. And there's also no way to know what the spread was. And I just think that there is no reason, there's no purpose, there's no benefit in keeping that information from the public. I think that we're elected to evaluate the town manager. It's probably the most important, to supervise him, and evaluating him is probably the most important thing that we do. And to present a summary evaluation that does not really identify how individual people voted doesn't give anybody much information.
Right, it said summary evaluation, didn't say where did everybody vote. It said summarize the views of the people, the board members. And the only way that was legal that I felt to do that, not regardless of whether open meeting law allowed or not, would be to say we're a board governed by majority. Therefore, whether it was a 3-to-2, a 4-to-1, or a 5-to-0, a majority rules in that designation. And that's what ended up defining in section A, summary of competence review, what got described, what got put there. The spread, I'm not sure the spread bears any meat or importance, because ultimately the competence review has to be a majority in a certain section to have validity.
Mm-hmm.
So you could put the spread there, and in my opinion, that would just confuse people. Well, what's the total outcome? Should I put the spread and then say, but the majority does this? I don't see how that does anything less than obfuscate
Well, in this,
the actual summarization of the board's evaluation of the individual.
well, what I gave you shows that both a number tallying and individual identification on those checklists.
Yes, and what you don't know is I vehemently argued against doing that when it came out and strongly said it shouldn't be done that way.
Well, I vehemently argue in favor of it.
I recognize that.
I think that the public deserves to know how each of us voted.
Then they can ask us and we can tell them how we voted, if that's so important to them, in my opinion. Yeah, you have a public comment. Sorry, let me give a chance. Any other board members want to weigh in here? John?
Yeah, if I'm not allowed to let the general public see the whole report that I wrote, I'm not in favor of pieces of it being extracted out and displayed.
Right.
It's out of context,
I get that.
Right?
and that's not right.
Thank you, John, I completely agree with you.
I felt it was very difficult to articulate including B and matching it to A with the spread, because it doesn't make any sense to the public. Yeah, you have a comment, please, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm Deb Busser, and I don't know the legality of how the process is for a public employee, but I do know I have 15 years of HR experience and consultancy work, and it's very common for performance reviews and any other type of 360 reviews to demonstrate a spread that actually shows transparency, and I think it's a very common practice. So again, I don't know what the rules are or the legality is around that, but I think in terms of encouraging transparency and having the public feel like they understand what's going on, I think it's a very common practice that I'd encourage you to consider.
Do you, may I ask, follow up, my recognition of 360 is that the individuals are not, that pulled those are not necessarily identified. It is, the spread is identified. The spread is identified, but not the individuals, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yes, so I could put X's in different boxes, but I wouldn't put initials if I were following that guidance.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah.
That's what was done in, let's see, how many years ago? 1, 2, 3, 4 years ago, it was just done with the spread of X's. I don't know why it changed to have, I wasn't on the board at that point, but then for 2 years in a row, all of the people were identified by initials. And I did specifically ask Brian Mazur that question, and he said you can do that.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor. Does the board, I'll take a vote. All those in favor of the motion to include a spread with people's initials, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Nay. Motion fails. Any other,
So John, what is your suggestion? As it stands now, you're
excuse
not.
me, I'm running this meeting.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask John what other suggestions there are, since someone else objected to the way this is right now.
Is there a motion to amend on the table? We are clearly bound by the rules of procedure here, which
Oh.
say that we have to make a motion to change, and then that motion can be discussed.
For the purpose of discussion, I will move that we all release our individual.
Whoa, I will not allow that motion, absolutely not. Excuse me.
She can make it.
I know, I will not allow it.
Why not? It's what we did last year.
She can make it. Just, you know what
Fine,
to do with it.
she can make
so-
it.
She can make it.
Go for it. Who wants to second that motion? I'm not hearing any seconds.
I make a motion that we accept the summary evaluation as presented.
Second.
So may I clarify that that does mean that we are not allowed to share other information that, I mean, I think I've heard two things, because you said I can share how I voted on things, but you also, I
If-
think, said we're not supposed to share our.
If
Oh.
someone comes up to you and asks you, well, how did you vote? I don't know what the law is about that. I'll have to be honest with you.
Personnel related.
Huh?
Personnel related.
Personnel related, so, you know, I would use extreme caution.
Well,
The summary, Mr. Chairman, is the public record,
That's
Correct.
correct.
not
Anything that-
individual
and anything that
reviews.
deviates from the public record would be considered a challenge to the board's votes.
and may I ask, is there no sense on this board of wanting to get further clarification of what is legal?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Deegan?
Yes, Becky, I completely understand why you're asking the questions you're understanding and have asked them over the years. And this is just an ever-changing law that protects employees and the integrity. And because the town manager is basically the only employee here in town that has a evaluation that potentially is discussed in public, there has to be a certain level of anonymity contained within what we release in the summary review to protect the integrity of the employee. And therefore, that's what happened in Wayland, and that's why the law was changed. And while you can try and circumvent and change, until you do, this is what exists. So while it might not be perfect, it is what it is, and I would suggest we abide by it.
My understanding of the ruling in Wayland was that we had to submit our individual evaluations to a non-board member, a paid employee, which we did, and then they were all given to the chair to make a summary. I don't believe the Wayland decision said anything at all.
So there's a
About
motion on the table,
that.
and I'd like to restrict conversion to that motion on the table.
So the motion is to approve this?
Summary.
Summary as written without amendments.
All right, I do have another comment to make.
Is it pertaining to the motion on the table?
Yes?
Okay.
Our individual evaluations do not become public. However, they do become available to each of us to read. And I fully intend to do that, and I would invite you all to do the same. I also had
Okay.
other comments of my own that I thought should be included in a summary. I feel somewhat the same as what John stated, that a summary doesn't really give the context.
There's a motion on the table to accept as amended, or accept without amendments. Becky, I don't want you to feel as if that motion has cut off your ability to request other small amendments to the document. If you feel that there's one or two items within a different section that you'd like to have included that I did not include, please let me know. If you, however, feel that there's nothing short of, changing the way the document is written and worked would satisfy that, I don't know that that's gonna happen here tonight. I just wanna.
Well, I'll tell you that I'm shocked by the resistance to including the spread or identifying individuals, since I fully expected that would happen. That's the way it was done 2 years ago. And I'm shocked by not even a lack of interest in finding out whether it's legal or not, since I understand, did it this way because you thought it was not legal the other way. I heard that it is legal the other way, and I think that we should explore that.
Yeah, I recognize, I trust it's legal.
You said you did it because you thought it was not legal.
No, I said I did it this way because I thought it was the best evaluation of how to make a summary.
No, I'm talking about identifying the people on the checklists.
I did it, I would never identify the people. I would potentially put a spread, but again, I would never identify the people.
The motion failed in order to identify by initials the
Correct.
people. However, if you wanted to offer a motion to have the spread included, Becky,
I would
You
love
could
that,
s-
yes.
so offer it.
I don't know that wouldn't create more confusion, but, so that would require the original mover to, table her motion. And he or she may wish to force a vote, that's up to them.
Mr. Chairman,
Mm-hmm.
Dawn is
The
saying.
motion made was that that the spread be included of individual votes on the checklist. If it was legal, she'd like to have the individual members listed, and if not legal, she would like to show X's on how people
All right,
voted.
so it's already been asked and
And
answered.
then-
Thanks for the clarification.
Thank you, Dawn.
So the spread is going to be included. Is that what I
The
just
spread
read?
is not
No.
going to be included. No, the amendment failed.
So you,
So I started to say I was expecting there to be some change in that. I was also going to ask for 3 of my comments that you did not include to be included. As it stands now, I'm going to vote against the summary because I think it is, it's a sham. I will
sham.
remove that word. That's a
sham.
mistake. It is incomplete. I feel that it is incomplete. I'm sorry, I apologize for a bad word. I feel it's incomplete and I
have done
don't support it.
everything in my power to try to give you opportunity to get things included. I have delayed a vote on acceptance. I have
What do you mean?
worked really hard to put this in, yet my compilation is a sham?
I apologize, Barry. I said it's not a sham. It is incomplete, I believe, without,
Yes, it doesn't have 90% of my comments in there either, but
it's
I
not the
don't necessarily consider it
comments.
incomplete,
I believe it is incomplete without the spread.
which has been asked and answered.
Pardon me?
It's been asked and answered. The amendment failed.
I particularly believe that it's incomplete to have a summary evaluation that says the majority voted meets expectations.
Do you believe that to be inaccurate?
I don't believe it to be inaccurate, I believe it to be incomplete.
Look, if it is, can I please interject here?
Absolutely. Save me.
If we approve this motion to accept this and it passes, and you go to review our individual summaries, okay? And
Who, me?
performance- Yeah, you.
Yeah?
And you look, and you average out, and you find that the result that's here meets expectations. And if you find that to be false, then you can make a motion to
It's not, I don't question it, I'm
I
sure
thought I
that
just
that
heard
is
that.
accurate.
Okay,
It is
then-
incomplete.
So if this, you can make a
It does
motion to
not-
reconsider at a later point.
The public has a right to know.
Well,
The board has to follow its evaluation policy. That the
But its
board-
evaluation policy is silent on
We
this.
have to comply with state law, we have to comply with evaluation policy.
I've been
Only-
told that we would comply with state law if we identified the spread and the individuals.
And the chair is tasked with doing the evaluation and compiling the summary. The chair may have made some decisions, the chair may have some experience in this in his lifetime to do it this way. He may have chosen certain things for certain reasons. He may have read all the reviews, recognized that perhaps there were certain elements of those reviews that were biased and should not be in anything, and chose to not put in one way or the other on both sides of the equation. He may have thought through this and spent many hours debating because he knew exactly what would happen at this review when these things got left out. That being said, I followed the letter and the intent of the summary evaluation process. I believe I did it in a manner which was respectful to both the board and the employee being reviewed. I believe I correctly and accurately accounted for the board's statements and ideas and intent and where they wish to land on certain items. And that the majority view of the board is accurately reflected in this document.
Mr. Chair, I call for a vote.
Yeah, point of order, I'll call, thanks, Josh. All those in favor of the motion on the table, which is to, if I get this wrong, just hit me, to accept the summary evaluation without amendments. Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition?
No.
That's 4 yes and 1 no. So this review now becomes a public document,
Should be put on file with the town clerk.
and I will send it to the town clerk for, in a PDF form, for his, filing.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
We need
sir.
to get-
may I request that we put a warrant article in to double our stipends?
Double zero is still zero, but gladly you can do so. Would you
Thank
like to
you.
open the warrant for that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Do you have a question related to the process, the vote?
I don't, should I?
No, is it? Just general comment?
Better use the mic.
We'll roll back to public comment period and I'll allow you to go ahead. Please, if you want to take the mic or you have general comment, that's fine.
We must, if it's for the
We need,
cable,
the public at
it's
home
for
needs to hear
cable
you.
TV.
That's what's going on there,
That's
so sorry for the
Pardon my
confusion.
interruption to the
That's
chair,
okay.
town manager, as well as the select board members. I was trying to follow along with the agenda. I'm a representative of SEIU Local 880,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure where we fall on the agenda. I just didn't want us to lose our opportunity.
Sure.
It's SEIU. I don't know if it's ongoing business or if it's new business, old business. But,
What particular item were you concerned about?
we are representing the cafeteria workers, and
We
with our, we have ongoing issues with the school committee, and we were told to, that we would be able to, ask questions
Okay, so
on
I
behalf
know.
of the board.
No, I appreciate that.
Indeed.
I'm not sure that there was a placeholder for that. I will delineate that there was an opening made when Marlena Gilbert asked for feedback. And
We were confused.
no, just and I don't want to suppress anybody's discussion here. We're basically at the end of our meeting. We've got a couple liaison reports, so let's go ahead. I will roll back to public comment period
Okay.
and allow you to respond in kind to Marlena Gilbert's statement with the pleasure of the board. Does the board have any issues with that?
I also think it would pertain to Article 4, potentially.
The article in the budget? It could.
Marlena told the board last week that the budget contains full funding for the current operation, so it does not.
The way it currently
Correct.
exists.
At this year's rate.
Okay.
Marlena, the only door that was open in this public meeting, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, personally, I have no concerns about hearing. I think it's important, though, to make sure that you guys are clear that because they're a regional district, the school committee is autonomous from this board and the municipal side.
We're
That we don't have any, this is not within our purview. I mean, we're happy to.
Yeah, if you're looking for the camera, this is a way to get
No,
cameras.
we were told, we thought this would be a great opportunity to share our side of the story, you know, with the ongoing issues that we're having with the school committee in hopes of gathering support.
Yeah,
of
the
board.
reality is that we get the request from the school district to fund what they fund, and we don't have say in operational matters. There is an opportunity at town meeting if you want to discuss that item on the budget as it comes up. There's also an opportunity at school district meetings. I don't know that your statements would, you know, we don't have any authority or any position to take on this. So I'm not sure.
Well, there is
I
one
apologize.
budgetary question.
Sure, yeah,
Is there,
Yeah, take the mic.
yeah.
the budgetary question, I believe, is there $70,000 that is allocated to the school committee on behalf of saving cafeteria jobs?
That's
Can-
not how it works.
Yeah.
Can I just?
Yeah,
can I
that's
answer that?
fine.
They
Yeah.
give us an assessment each year. We don't approve their
Yes.
operating budget. They tell us that our operating budget is $40-something million, your assessment is $20-something million, and that's what the town votes on. The individual line items that may have that 70,000 or not is not voted on by this board or the Groton Town Meeting. We only vote the bottom line assessment.
They do.
They decide their budget.
Yeah, and they do sometimes review that budget at a presentation at town meeting. And I believe the FinCom sometimes will look through some of the things, but at the end of the day, we don't even do that, the FinCom doesn't do that because we don't have any choice. The town gets the budget number and that's the number, that we have, the assessment, excuse me, not a budget number. So if I were to recommend, you know, in your shoes, I would think that perhaps if you have a challenge to the school budget or you have questions about it, either start with the school committee or the budget subcommittee.
We're in
Okay.
ongoing.
And then come
talks
to
and
town meeting,
negotiations.
and when they go into presentation on the school budget, the moderator has the ability to open the floor up to any discussions and comments, and
Well, as non-residents, they're gonna have to
They'd have to
get.
get
yeah, you have to get permission from the moderator. So I would, do you know Jason Cupey? He's our Cupey, excuse me.
Cowpea.
He's our town moderator. He's a very, he does his job extremely well, and he's very willing to have conversation with people about opportunity and times to speak about certain things, especially if you're not from Groton and you would like to have something to say at a town meeting. He would be he is town meeting. We are town meeting, but, you
So
know,
time is not on our side.
recognize
you know,
that.
because, you know, the school committee, I believe, can force a vote that will jeopardize the 23 cafeteria members that we represent. This is a privatization campaign. Obviously, we want our members who are thriving taxpayers and constituents within the community
Mhm.
to stay obviously gainfully employed, and, they're vested in this town. We don't want, outside private companies to come in where they're not vested in this community, and, in terms of, the well-being and care of their food and nutritional needs. I think, there's a conflict.
I appreciate that. You know, again, there's a separation of powers on purpose in a regional situation. Then the next best place you have, if you've exhausted what you want to do at the school committee level or the budget subcommittee level at the school, is to come to town meeting and either get permission as an
When is
outsider.
that? When's town meeting?
Town meeting is
The end of the
April
month?
29th.
April 29th.
All right.
But understand that when you arrive, since you're not a voter, you will be asked to to sit in the rear seats of the auditorium.
Or the front,
And you won't
Front
have
two
the
rows.
ability
or the front two
to
rows.
speak
Front two rows
unless
for the
it's been
department heads.
worked out with the moderator
Yeah.
ahead of time.
So, and you can just look on our, yeah.
But it's,
Forgive me for, you know, the process.
No,
We
it's
would have mentioned, we didn't know that was our Q3.
Yeah.
you know,
but the
I thought
main,
it was on the agenda, so that's why.
the main issue is that it is a regional school district. It has authority to operate by itself
Under its charter.
under the way that the laws set it up. They set their budget, they tell us, and they tell Dunstable how much we each have to pay. That's the way it works.
Okay, yes.
So there is no bearing weight on the
No,
select board?
I think what you heard, and I'll try and reiterate what the town manager said, was that the assessment that was handed down to the town to vote on included the $70,000 to fund the existing contract in the way that it is today. Understanding that the school committee doesn't work for the Board of Selectmen or the town manager. They're elected officials both in Groton and in Dunstable. And that they had a audit done of all of the services that they provide. If one of the recommendations on the audit was to privatize custodial work last year, which they implemented, now one of the recommendations is to potentially privatize cafeteria. So, if it's a matter of $70,000, this is a policy issue that has to be made and voted on by the school committee. So, while the select board certainly can have opinions on it, we have no vote, we have no anything, okay? All we have is nothing. Yeah, that's what we have, when it comes down to this. I hate to say that.
We are powerless over the school
We are
committee.
powerless over the school committee, it's correct. Now,
And that's-
sure, could we speak to the school committee members? Sure, we could speak to them, but I mean, it's one of the things is that you can advocate to town meeting. You can advocate to them that for 23 employees, $70,000 translates to $3,000 per employee, and do you really wanna go in this direction? That's about as powerful as you could go.
Last thing, if I can mention, if there is supporters amongst the board, we are having a rally, April 10th, and I'd cordially invite all of you to come down and stand in solidarity with SEIU 888 on behalf of the cafeteria workers, if you so choose to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe we are now at select board liaison reports. Do I have any select board liaison reports? No. We are liaisy. Minutes, regularly scheduled meeting minutes of March 25th, 2019. That's terrible. I'm sorry, that was a dad joke, excuse me.
I
Yes.
have a question. Mark, now that
Yep.
we are finished approving things on the warrant, is it going to be posted on the,
The warrant
Oh.
will be sent to the printer tomorrow and posted on the town's website.
Do you need an official
Matter of fact,
vote on
I'm
that?
sure Dawn- I need you to vote to release the
Yes,
warrant.
we need to vote to release
Please
more.
do that.
okay, before,
Yeah,
before we make that motion, I would just like to suggest that before the next town meeting, which presumably is in the fall, I'd like this board to discuss if there is some way to publicize the warrant earlier than at this point. Because I learned that we have not been publicizing it because it keeps changing, which is a reasonable thing. But on the other hand, we had a public hearing a couple of weeks ago, and there's been a lot of reasons that I've had conversations with people who wanted to know about what's on the warrant. And, you know, it comes to us in the packet, which is a whole big deal. You can't just separate some of it out and send it to somebody, and you can't direct them to the town website. So I'd like us to figure out some way that people in the general public have access to the warrant as we're working on it before this point.
We've had this discussion before, Josh will probably recall it, and the reason we don't put out drafts of the warrant prior to the final draft is because it changes so much. People have wrong information, they come to town meeting expecting something when they see a draft, so we try not to post anything on the website until it's the final draft.
Well,
That's the rationale.
I
I
fully
understand your concern.
Absolutely, positively.
I fully understand that we don't want to increase confusion, but is there some way that we can do a better job of
I'll
letting
think of
people
something.
see
I'll
what they
come up
want to
with a
see?
proposal. You raise a very valid point, very valid point.
All right, Barry, you wanted a motion?
I'm looking for, thanks Becky, yes, looking for minutes of March.
No, a motion on the approving the
Oh,
warrant.
yes, jeez, yes, we need a motion to approve and post the warrant, correct?
Yes.
So moved,
So moved.
multiple times.
Triple moved.
Triple moved.
It was moved 3 times and seconded twice.
Must be a good one.
All right, any discussion necessary? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition, abstention? I heard that unanimous. Thank you very much. And we,
I move that we approve the meeting minutes of the regularly scheduled meetings of both March 25th and April 1st.
Second.
it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving both minutes, and the chair concurs that the minutes of April 1st are right according to the consensus here, even though it was not here. All those in favor, signal saying aye.
Aye.
All right, both,
Chairman,
all those in favor, yep, that's approved. Unanimous, thank you. Yes,
But
Josh? do you-
Dawn, you got my note about relabeling, right? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I move that this board move into executive session pursuant to MGL, Chapter 30A, Section 21, Clause A, 21A, Clause 2, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, or to conduct collective bargaining sessions or contract negotiations with non-union personnel, purpose town manager's contract, and not to adjourn the regular session.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Roll call vote for executive session. The chair does declare, by the way.
Pine,
Uh,
aye.
Deegan, aye.
Manugie and I.
Peace, aye.
Tiger eye.
All right, we are now going to enter an executive session.